The sky over Mesa Verde is veiled in ash blush and starlight, as if the heavens themselves have just exhaled. You stand at the edge of a cliff, the sandstone beneath your feet, warm from the day's sun, yet the air now carries a chill. Below you, rows of stone dwellings nestle under the overhanging rock like forgotten dreams. Not a single voice echoes through the canyon. No laughter, no footsteps. Just wind threading through windows that haven't seen candlelight in centuries. You press your hand to the ancient rock. It doesn't flinch, of course it doesn't, but it holds stories, thousands of them. And the biggest one, why did all of this, these intricate cities carved into cliff faces, these ceremonial kivas, these food stores packed with maize and hope go silent in a heartbeat of history? You breathe in, heavy and slow. The question doesn't answer itself, but you're here now, and the journey begins with a soft tread and an open mind. Your boots crunch lightly as you move through the dust of vanished lives. Here's something peculiar. Already, Cliff Palace, the grandest of all the stone communities, seems too perfect to have been simply abandoned. You can still see finger-smoothed mortar, soot-stained ceilings, even corn-grinding stones nestled beside doorways, as if someone's about to return from lunch. It feels paused, not empty. Like the world hit pause and then forgot to hit play again. Historians still argue whether the end came suddenly or gradually. Some suggest enemies drove the inhabitants out overnight. Others claim decades of migration slow as a sigh. But no matter the theory, one fact holds true. At some point, Mesa Verde fell silent, and no one ever came back to stay. You sit at the edge of a crumbled wall. Below, moonlight dapples a steep stairway carved into bare rock so narrow and precarious you'd need mountain goat ancestry to descend safely. And yet people, entire families, used it daily. Children with water jugs, elders with aching knees, all balancing on what amounts to a rocky ladder glued to a cliff. You can't help it. No wonder they left you mutter. A chuckle escapes you softer than the wind. You're allowed a joke or two. It's a long story ahead, and if we don't laugh occasionally, we'll fall asleep for the wrong reasons. Not far from you, a scatter of potsherds glints under starlight broken pottery left exactly where it fell 800 years ago. In modern terms, imagine a whole town leaving and not even bothering to grab their Tupperware. That's how sudden it seems. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. You're going to walk backwards in time, deeper into the story. Before the silence, there was sound. Chatter, drumming footsteps, babies crying, elders chanting, dogs barking. For over 600 years, these cliffs were alive with it. Mesa Verde wasn't a ghost town, it was a living, pulsing home. Then one day, all that music stopped. You reach up to trace the faint fingerprint left in a mortar joint. It fits yours eerily well. Someone long ago, maybe a builder, maybe a child playing with wet clay, pressed into this wall and didn't know they'd be touching you across centuries. Here's a grounded fact the ancestral Puebloans, often called the Anasazi, a term many now find problematic, built these dwellings between the 12th and 13th centuries. They didn't just survive here, they thrived. Hundreds of rooms, multiple villages, elaborate road networks that connected them to a wider world. Yet today, the only inhabitants are swallow spiders and the occasional wind-scattered tourist brochure. But what happened here wasn't unique. Across the Four Corners region, dozens of settlements show the same eerie pattern. One generation building stone masterpieces, the next quietly slipping away. It's as if the entire civilization performed a well-rehearsed bow, then vanished behind the curtain. Your eyes close for a moment. The wind hisses through the canyons like a sleeping breath. There's something deeply poetic about standing in the remnants of a society so advanced, so tightly tied to the land, and realizing they chose to walk away. Or did they? Some theories run wild: cosmic cataclysms, mass hallucinations, alien visitations. You'll stumble into those potholes later. For now, trust that we'll start from what's visible, sensible, tangible. Stone corn bones and silence. But don't worry, we won't stay in the silence too long. Suddenly a bat zips past your ear and you nearly flinch off the ledge. Okay, that's one voice still calling through the cliffs. You chuckle again. Still better than my upstairs neighbors. You begin to move, guided only by moonlight and storylight. Every step forward will be a step backward through time. Before you understand why Mesa Verde fell silent, you'll have to listen to what it once said aloud. You'll climb into kivas, lit by sacred fire. You'll sit beside potters painting whirls onto red clay. You'll swat at gnats near mesa-top fields of corn and beans. You'll sit at a child's coming-of-age ceremony. You'll tremble at the approach of drought. And eventually you'll sit with the family during their last night beneath the rock as they pack quietly and close the stone door behind them. But for now, as the moon rises fully and the stars blink more boldly, you nestle against the wall, ears wide open. And you listen, because sometimes the most important part of a story isn't how it ends, but why no one told it sooner. Your hand lingers on the stone, and already you feel it humming, not with sound, but with absence. As the moon climbs higher, the cliffside breathes in its silence. You shuffle deeper into the shadows of the ruins, ducking under a soot-smudged lintel beam, where once a door hung like a wooden tongue in the mouth of the stone. Inside it's cooler. Still, as though time takes smaller steps in here. This was someone's home. You imagine a mother brushing maize flour from her hands, a father repairing a sandal strap with sinew, a child chasing a dog whose tail disappears behind a water jar. Ordinary things, familiar things, things that make their sudden absence feel all the more enormous. You run your fingers along the wall, stone plastered with mud, blackened from years of cooking fires. There's a comfort in that generations adding their layer of soot, like a signature. But now the soot has long since stopped thickening. The fire pits are cold, the rooms undisturbed. You breathe in and the only smell is dust. There's a low scraping sound. You freeze, just a mouse darting across the floor. For a split second you imagine the scurrying of 1,000 feet, the clatter of cooking pots, the chatter of a dozen languages. It's all gone. Why, the theories you'll find are as numerous as the walls. Some archaeologists favor environmental collapse. Maybe it was a mega drought, the kind that withers not just crops, but hope. Others argue war raiders from the north or south, or even civil tensions turned bloody. Then there are the migration theorists who believe the people didn't vanish at all, they just moved on. And then, of course, are the fringe voices who claim something stranger. Sky serpents, ancient curses, dimensional shifts. One even claims the cliff dwellers walked through a portal into another world hidden beneath the canyon floor. You'll get there, promise. But first, something humbler. You stoop beneath another lintel and emerge into a courtyard open to the stars. Here, the silence is total. No insects, no rustling leaves, just you and the stone and the question hanging like a lantern with no flame. You crouch near a metate, a grinding basin worn smooth by years of labor. You run your hand over it, still warm from the sun, still cold from time. A woman once knelt here day after day, grinding maize into meal. Her knees left impressions in the dirt, now hardened into memory. She probably had jokes, a favorite song, maybe a stubborn cousin who always overcooked the squash. Mainstream history tells us that these cliff dwellings weren't the beginning, they were the climax. The ancestral Puebloans lived in this region for centuries before moving into the cliffs. Their early homes were pit houses, semi-subterranean structures dug into the earth. Over generations, they built upward, outward, and finally inward into the rock faces. That's the fascinating part. The people of Mesa Verde didn't hide in the cliffs. They moved there deliberately long after they'd already mastered mesa top living. The question isn't why they left the cliffs, but why they came to them in the first place. Historians still argue whether the cliff dwellings were for protection, climate control, or religious significance. All three none a whim of architectural taste. Whatever the case, they built not as refugees but as visionaries. This was no temporary camp, this was home. You step out to a ledge, toes curling over the edge. Below the canyon yawns open. The echo of your breath bounces lazily back to you. How did they haul all the stones up here? How did they balance babies on backs while climbing these death-defying paths? The answer is simple, slowly, and with love. And possibly some colourful cursing in a language now lost. They carried sandstone blocks, water jugs, logs, pottery, all by hand up and down trails that make your calves ache just looking at them. The people of Mesa Verde weren't just survivors, they were engineers, visionaries, maybe even stubborn perfectionists. There's something oddly comforting in that. Still something nags at you. You scan the walls. Nothing is broken. No signs of siege. The structures are intact. No fire damage. No scattered skeletons or panicked footprints. It looks peaceful. So if this wasn't a sudden disaster, what was it? A choice? You close your eyes and try to picture the day it happened. Did they gather in the square? Did someone stand up and say it's time? Did they leave in groups, or one by one did they cry? No one knows. That's part of the ache. We have pots, stone walls, ash layers, but not the emotions, not the whispered goodbyes. The archaeological record is meticulous about corn types and carbon dating, but hopelessly mute when it comes to grief. And yet, you can feel it, can't you? You rest your head against the stone. It hums again, still not sound, but almost. A lullaby in a language made of temperature and pressure and patient erosion. The silence here is not the silence of emptiness. It's the silence of something finished, something once loud now at rest. And yet even finished things leave traces. You rise dust off your knees and smile to yourself. Time to rewind further. Before the whispers, before the soot, before the cliffs had windows. To understand why Mesa Verde fell silent, you'll need to learn how it first began to speak. You step away from the cliff edge and let time pull you backward like a receding tide. The sandstone underfoot fades into grassy plain. The cliffs blur, and now you're surrounded not by walls, but by wide open silence. The year is, well, no one's entirely sure, somewhere between 10,000 and 8,000 BCE. The Ice Age has recently packed its things and left, and the continent is breathing in new warmth. You feel it in your chest, crisp, sharp, unfiltered. The air is cleaner, the light raw and enormous. A herd of mammoth trundles by in the distance, oblivious to your modern footwear. You keep still watching from behind a rise in the land as a small hunting party creeps closer, spears poised, bodies lean and wired with focus. These aren't the cliff dwellers yet, not even close, but they're the spiritual ancestors. The first footsteps in the long journey toward Mesa Verde. They don't build homes yet, not really. They move with the seasons, chasing game and sheltering in natural alcoves. Their knowledge of the land is intimate, closer than marriage. They know which berries make you sing and which make you see spirits. They know where the elk sleep, where the rabbits dance. You envy them just a little. But there's also hardship. One of the hunters limps, old injury maybe. And they share the landscape with creatures that are frankly nightmare material. Saber-toothed cats, short-faced bears, giant sloths the size of minivans. You begin to understand why early humans developed storytelling. You'd need something comforting after a day dodging prehistoric death traps. And yet something soft takes root. You notice it first in the rhythm, the way they walk together, the way they stop to share meat without being asked, the way one mother quietly hums as she ties a strand of sinew around her child's wrist, a charm perhaps, or just a thread of memory. Community, it's a fragile ember, but it's there. This is the bedrock of everything to come. Mainstream historians call this the archaic period, when nomadic groups slowly began experimenting with more stable living. Temporary camps became seasonal sites. Hunting tools gave way to grinding stones. The beginnings of agriculture spark like flint. You find yourself near a small cluster of brush shelters. Someone's drawing a deer shape on a sandstone slab. Not art for art's sake, but something older. Maybe it's a prayer, maybe it's a record, or maybe, just maybe, it's a joke about the guy who missed the shot. Archaeologists argue endlessly about how much of this early life was spiritual versus practical. Was every sunrise sacred? Did they have gods, or simply gratitude? Did they bury their dead in ceremony, or just keep walking? One quirky theory suggests these early groups didn't differentiate between the physical and the spiritual world at all. That every action, grinding seeds, cleaning fish, watching a storm, was imbued with meaning. You like that idea? It makes the world feel whole. You sit down beside a flat stone where someone once cracked open pine nuts. The fragments still lie there, fossilized against time. You reach out gently, half expecting them to scatter like birds, but they stay, rooted, like the people would eventually become. From this point, the journey toward the cliff dwellings is slow, almost geological in its patience. Thousands of years pass before corn reaches the region, migrating north from Mesoamerica like a green whisper. Corn changes everything, but not yet. For now, the people move lightly. They know the sky like we know GPS. They read the land with bare feet, and every step they take they leave no trace except in memory, in story, in bloodlines that will one day build walls in stone. It's humbling. You check your pockets, your phone, your tools. None of it would help you here. You'd be the worst member of the tribe. A burden with weak knees and bad Wi-Fi. Still you feel welcomed, as if the ancestors are nodding at you. Not with pride, but with patience. They don't know what Mesa Verde will become. They don't know about the magnificent kivas or the perfect masonry, or the baffling silence at the end. They only know this moment. The meat is shared, the fire is warm, the children are safe. And for now, that's enough. You stand again, and the landscape begins to shift. The mammoth herds fade, the air thickens, the shelters become sturdier, clustered near water sources. You're moving through centuries like pages in a wind-blown book. Soon corn will sprout in these fields. Pit houses will nestle in the soil, and the people, these early wanderers with mammoth memories, will slowly become the architects of a future they can't yet imagine. But it all begins here on this plain, with the sky wide open and a song hummed into the wind. The plain gives way to hills, and the hills to mesas. Now the wind carries new scents, smoke clay roasting corn. You blink and the world has shifted again. Gone are the mammoths, the crude, shelters, the endless wandering. In their place homes, real homes, you approach one slowly. A round structure low to the ground with a smoke hole in the roof and a ladder sticking out like a curious tongue. A pit house, half underground, half above, like the people who built it were trying to keep one foot in the earth and the other in the sky. You climb down the ladder. It creaks under your weight, but welcomes you all the same. The inside is dim and warm, the air tinged with the smell of cedar smoke and boiled beans. A family sits around a fire pit speaking in soft tones. The mother adjusts a child's blanket, the father mends a stone blade. The walls are packed with mud, the floor swept smooth. It's humble, yes, but it's home, and it's full of life. This is around 500 CE, the basket maker 3 era, for those who like their history labelled and boxed. But these people, they don't use calendars. They measure time in seasons, harvests, and family generations. Every wrinkle on the grandmother's face is worth a dozen textbooks. You glance around. In one corner, a storage pit holds corn and squash. Another holds water in clay jars sealed with pine resin. A third pit, empty, might have been for valuables, or maybe snacks, possibly both. Outside, the settlement sprawls wider than you expected. Dozens of pit houses connected by narrow footpaths. Children run past you chasing a stray dog. A pair of women chat as they weave yucca fibers into sandals, fingers moving like wind across reeds. Mainstream archaeologists note that this period marks a major transition. Permanent villages take root. Pottery becomes common, coiled, smoothed, painted in black on white designs that mimic the stars. Storage gets more sophisticated. Social structures firm up. You can almost feel the gears of civilization beginning to grind together. And yet it's not rigid, not yet. You sit by a garden plot. Corn stands in tidy rows, flanked by beans that climb their stalks like eager children, and squash that sprawls like a lazy uncle. The 3 sisters, they're called plants, that help one another grow. Symbiosis in agricultural form. Your grocery store has nothing on this. A man kneels nearby, whispering something to the soil as he plants a new row. A blessing, a chant, a complaint about the lack of rain. Historians still argue whether such rituals were spiritual or simply habit passed through the generations. You smile. Same difference. As you wander further, you notice something curious. Small stone circles partially buried in the ground. Miniature kivas, perhaps, or early storage rooms. One theory posits these were community spaces, shared granaries, or meeting places. Another suggests they were spiritual centers. And of course there's a rogue academic who claims they were ancient hot tubs. Okay, that last one's not widely accepted, but it does make the past feel more fun. You pause at a mural painted inside one of the structures, stylized figures holding hands, standing beneath what might be stars or ears of corn. It's hard to tell. Either way, it's beautiful. And here's something quirky. Early evidence shows they occasionally plastered their walls with crushed snail shells for shimmer. Yes, Neolithic, sparkle, eat your heart out, Pinterest. But for all this charm, something else lingers in the air. Caution. There's no wall around the village, no defensive towers, no weapon caches. But the way they place their homes close together, almost huddled, makes you wonder if safety was more a hope than a guarantee. Archaeological digs reveal signs of occasional violence from this era, arrowheads embedded in bonfire scars on some dwellings. Was it neighbor against neighbor, outsiders? A bad trade turned worse. No one knows for sure. But even in this early village, the seeds of conflict grow alongside the squash. Still, the dominant feeling here is not fear, but focus. These people are invested in their homes, their food, their gods, whatever form those gods may take. You sit by the fire again, watching the smoke curl up through the roof hole. Outside, the stars begin to blink into view, just as they did the night before, just as they always have. It's a good life, hard, yes, but grounded, rooted, and slowly beneath your feet you feel it, the land absorbing their footprints, layer by layer, memory becoming sediment, sediment becoming time. These pit houses will one day be abandoned, their roofs caved in, their ladders stolen by curious raccoons. But not yet. For now they are warm and full of stories. You curl your fingers into the dirt floor and close your eyes. The cliffs are still centuries away, but the people are already dreaming of stone. The dirt beneath your fingertips starts to harden. As you lift your hand, the pit house around you stretches taller, the walls shifting upward like waking limbs. You blink, and the world has climbed out of the earth. Time has passed, centuries in fact. The pit houses have evolved. You now find yourself standing in a surface-dwelling, rectangular and sturdy, with thick sandstone walls and timbered ceilings. The floors are smoothed with clay, and doorways are smaller than you'd expect, just tall enough to duck through. Efficient insulation, or an ancient prank on tall people? Maybe both. Outside the village sprawls with confidence. Rows of homes cluster together, linked by courtyards, kivas, and storage rooms. You hear voices, a woman calling to a child, laughter rising near a cornfield, the distant beat of a drum. The air smells of roasted beans and juniper smoke. Civilization hums not loudly, but with certainty. Welcome to the Pueblo II period, roughly 900 to 1150 CE. A golden age is dawning here in the Four Corners region, and you're in the thick of it. You stroll through the village, feeling the rhythm of daily life. Women pound corn using stone metates, the thudding sounds in a familiar syncopation. Men chip away at stone blocks, smoothing edges with such precision it would make a modern mason weep. Children chase each other between doorways, occasionally stopping to poke sticks into lizard holes, as children do. There's order here. Purpose. These aren't scattered settlements anymore. The population has surged and people are building with long-term vision, straight walls, tightly fit masonry. Rooms aligned with astronomical markers. They're not just surviving, they're shaping their world with intention. One mainstream historical detail this period marks a significant shift to large planned community centers. Villages are arranged around ceremonial kivas, circular semi-subterranean structures used for rituals, storytelling, decision-making, and according to one slightly grumpy archaeologist, elaborate neighbor gossip. You descend into a kiva, now the air cool and still. The roof is supported by timber beams, and a sipapu, a symbolic hole in the floor, marks the place of emergence where ancestors rose into this world. Someone once told stories here. Big ones, creation, morality, weather forecasts disguised as myths. The kind of tales that bind people together better than any law. Your footsteps echo faintly as you climb out. You squint toward the fields beyond the village, where rows of corn ripple in the wind like green prayer flags. Irrigation systems stretch across the landscape, check dams, stone terraces, reservoirs. Water management in a land where the rain is more rumor than promise. Here's something fascinating. While Mesa Verde is famously dry, the people here engineered their environment with subtle genius. They diverted runoff, captured snowmelt, even stored water in cisterns tucked beneath stone. Some of these reservoirs still hold water today. Let that sink in. 1,000 years later, the water is still waiting, but not everything is utopia. You come across a room filled with charred beams and collapsed walls. Fire. Whether accidental or deliberate, it's hard to say. Some archaeologists suspect social tensions during this era. A few villages show signs of sudden abandonment, roofs, caved-in food, left untouched walls blackened with soot. Did they quarrel? Did rival clans clash? Did old tensions finally ignite? Historians still argue whether these events were isolated disputes or symptoms of something larger, a growing pressure under the polished surface of prosperity. You walk on past granaries filled with dried squash storerooms lined with pottery. The artistry is stunning. Geometric patterns, spirals, animal motifs, each pot a small manifesto of beauty and function. One theory suggests the designs doubled as clan markers or coded recipes for the contents inside, like ancient barcodes but way more stylish. A young girl walks past you carrying a painted bowl. She smiles as if to say, "Yes, I made this. No, you may not borrow it." You grin and let her pass. You arrive now at a central plaza where a group has gathered for what looks like a feast. Roasted rabbit, boiled beans, smoked turkey. Yes, turkeys. These birds, once wild, are now domesticated companions. Not quite pets, not quite dinner, but often both. You spot one pecking sassily at a corn cob. Another rides proudly on a child's shoulder like a feathered royal. One fringe theory claims turkeys were used in ceremonial dances, their feathers arranged into ornate cloaks and headdresses. You try to imagine a turkey solemnly participating in a religious rite. It's difficult, and yet the birds remain painted on walls, buried in ceremonial pits, honored in bone and story. They're part of this landscape as much as the stone and wind. Night begins to fall. A hush settles over the village. The fires glow softly. Drums beat slower now. A man steps forward into the plaza and raises his arms to the stars. The crowd stills. You can't understand the words he speaks, but you understand the tone. Gratitude, caution, hope. You watch the people's faces. They know the land can change. They know droughts come, that enemies sometimes sneak from the shadows. But for now, this moment is whole. And beneath their feet the sandstone whispers, "Not yet. Not yet, not yet." Mesa Verde still waits in the cliffs, but the people are on their way. Morning light stretches across the mesa like a cat waking from a nap, slow golden and completely uninterested in your schedule. You rise with it, brushing the dust from your knees as the village begins to stir. By now the landscape feels familiar. The hum of daily life, the rhythm of stone on stone, the smell of roasted corn and cedar smoke. But something has changed. You sense it in the architecture first. The homes are taller. You walk through a cluster of multi-room dwellings, rectangular, stacked, clean-lined like a Pueblo-shaped crossword puzzle. These aren't temporary shelters anymore, they're statements. The people are no longer just adapting to the land, they're mastering it, or at least trying to. This is the Pueblo III period, and you are standing on the cusp of a monumental shift. A new age is rising, and it's climbing. Down, yes. Strangely, down. You follow a winding path to the edge of the mesa. Then, like a secret revealed only to those willing to look, you spot them stone dwellings tucked beneath the overhangs of the canyon walls, nestled in the shade like sacred secrets. Cliff dwellings, they're here. And they are breathtaking. You descend slowly, carefully along a series of narrow switchbacks and hand-carved footholds. You try not to imagine slipping. You fail. Your hand clutches a root that's probably been used as a handle for generations. Your foot finds a groove smoothed by thousands before you. And then finally, you stand before it. Cliff Palace. It's larger than you imagined. A sweeping arrangement of sandstone rooms, towers, and kivas, all wrapped into the concave curve of the canyon wall, like an orchestra tucked inside a violin. Your breath catches. These aren't ruins, they're intentions, precision, vision. Every wall shaped with care, each room aligned to maximize warmth in winter shade, in summer. This was architecture tailored not to conquer the landscape, but to harmonize with it. Mainstream scholars call this period 1150 to 1300 CE the height of ancestral Pueblo achievement. The population peaks, communities become denser, construction moves from mesa tops to canyon alcoves, and suddenly the cliffs themselves become cities. But why historians still debate the cause of this dramatic architectural pivot? Was it for defense? Some suggest rising tensions, inter-village rivalries, raiders or even environmental refugees pushed people to seek safer havens. Others believe the cliff sites offered better climate control. Or perhaps they held spiritual significance, a way of nesting the people inside the bones of the earth. One fringe theory that the cliff dwellings were designed to mirror constellations, living star maps etched into stone. It's beautiful, speculative, and wildly unsupported. Still, you can't quite shake the image. Inside one dwelling you find storage rooms, tiny cubicles filled with old maize cobs, turkey bones and worn sandals. Everything has its place, even absence. You duck into a kiva half hidden from the sunlight above. The ladder groans under your weight, as if surprised to find someone climbing down after centuries of solitude. It's dark but not oppressive, peaceful. You sit by the fire pit, now long cold. The sipapoo waits beside you, a reminder of origins of emergence from worlds below. You wonder if the people ever sat here in silence, listening not to a story, but to the space between stories. The part where meaning settles. Then a noise. Outside, children laugh. You blink. Not ghosts, just echoes from memory. You emerge into the daylight, and for a moment, the canyon is alive again. Women stir pots. Men shape stone. A child scolds a turkey with surprising authority. Corn hangs in woven baskets from wooden beams. Life continues rhythmic and careful. You realize now that the cliffs weren't a retreat. They were a renewal, a decision, a statement that even amid uncertainty, the people would build higher, stronger, smarter. The cliffs offered more than protection, they offered perspective. From here, the world spreads in every direction. You see mesas, rivers, mountains. Trade routes that once carried turquoise macaw feathers, seashells from hundreds of miles away. The people of Mesa Verde were never isolated. They were a node in a sprawling network, a cultural web stretching from the Rockies to Mesoamerica. You take another breath, letting the silence of the canyon wrap around you like a shawl. It's not empty, it's full of stories, questions, warmth. The sun begins its descent, casting long shadows across the rooms. You notice faintly a handprint painted on the stone wall. Red ochre, a signature. You place your hand beside it. Not quite a match, but close enough. Then you hear it again, a faint beat. A drum, a heartbeat, no. Just the wind, but somehow that's enough. Mesa Verde has found its voice, and soon it will learn the weight of silence. You wake with the sun sliding over the canyon rim, its golden fingers creeping down the cliff walls like a cautious child reaching for something delicate. The sandstone glows, shifting from deep red to honeyed beige. Light flows into the alcove dwellings, and for a moment the entire cliff seems to exhale. Below, life stirs. You hear it in the quiet clink of pottery lids being lifted in the scrape of sandals over stone. A woman adjusts a drying rack of squash slices. A child yawns loudly from a shadowed doorway. Somewhere, a turkey gobbles indignantly at nothing in particular. Today is no festival, no crisis, just an ordinary morning in Cliff Palace, the kind that makes up the real backbone of history. You trail along a narrow ledge that serves as a hallway, brushing your fingers against the stone. It's cool to the touch and slightly crumbly at the edges, a reminder that even permanence has its limits. You duck into one of the larger rooms. It's stacked with maize ears hung from the rafters, baskets full of kernels, ceramic jars sealed with stone lids. The smell is earthy, warm, familiar. This is a food room, yes, but also a treasure vault, because here in Mesa Verde, corn is king, not metaphorically, literally. Without corn, nothing here works. You step back into the light and follow a woman as she descends a creaking ladder to the base of the cliff. A pathway leads out to the mesa top, where the fields stretch under an open sky. It's not easy access. No one would accuse these people of picking convenience over determination. You climb with her, huffing a little, and finally crest the ridge. And there they are, the gardens. Plots of land carefully spaced and sectioned, corn stalks rising tall beans climbing up their sides like acrobat squash plants fanning out below. The three sisters working together in perfect harmony. Your stomach grumbles, and the symbolism is not lost on you. Historians mark this as a core innovation of the ancestral Puebloan world. The trio of crops wasn't just efficient, it was cultural. Each plant benefited the others. Corn served as a trellis, beans fixed nitrogen in the soil, and squash shaded the roots, keeping them cool. You get the sense it wasn't just agriculture, it was philosophy, reciprocity, balance. But corn is something more. Corn gets stored, traded, celebrated. It appears in rituals, in origin, myths, even in personal names. It's sacred and mundane, at once breakfast and offering. You kneel beside a row and pull back the leaves on a ripening ear. Plump, golden kernels grin up at you. Even in this dry landscape, the people have coaxed fertility from dust and sunlight. But it's not always so generous. Rainfall here, is a drama queen, unpredictable, moody, occasionally showing up late with a thunderous entrance and then disappearing for weeks. To combat this, the Puebloans built check dams, low stone walls in arroyos that slowed water flow, allowing moisture to seep into the soil. They mulched with ash. They built terraced fields. They listened to the wind. And yet, drought always loomed. Tree Ring studies, a little modern science for your stroll, show periodic megadroughts during this era, not just dry spells, decade-long tantrums by the sky itself. Water tables dropped, springs vanished, crops withered before maturity. These events didn't happen every year, but when they did, the consequences were enormous. Still, the people adapted. They shared resources, rationed, moved fields uphill or downhill. In some communities, elders likely mediated disputes over water use. In others, well, things might have gotten ugly. Historians still debate whether competition for water directly led to violence or whether communities found peaceful ways to cope. Some archaeological sites show signs of cooperation, shared reservoirs, communal granaries. Others, defensive walls, burned homes, skeletons with embedded projectile points. You look up at the clouds gathering in the afternoon sky, teasing rain that may or may not fall. You understand the urgency now. Every drop mattered. Every field had to count. Back in the cliff dwellings, people begin returning from the fields, their baskets full, their faces sunburned. One man laughs as he pulls a miniature gourd from his satchel, misshapen but proudly displayed. It will make a good rattle, he says, or maybe a bowl. Either way, nothing is wasted here. You wander past a fire pit where women are roasting maize, charring the kernels, just enough to bring out the sweetness. Someone hands you a piece, and for a moment you forget this is all memory. You chew slowly. It tastes like patience. Nearby, a young boy shapes clay into a small pot. His grandmother watches quietly, only intervening when he adds an extra ridge that might make the pot tip over. Flat base, strong body, she mutters, not unkindly. It's more than pottery advice, it's life advice. You smile and move on. Evening returns, painting the canyon in lavender and bronze. Another day ends with full baskets, full bellies, and just enough water to hope for tomorrow. And through it all, corn stands at the center. The people here don't worship the sun or the moon or even the rain. They worship the seed, and in doing so, they feed the future. The next morning arrives with the quiet strength of stone, cool, dependable, and somehow older than it was the night before. You wake in the shadow of Cliff Palace, stretching stiff limbs on a slab of sandstone, smoothed by centuries of barefoot children. Today you notice the walls more than ever. Not just as boundaries, but as stories. Each block a sentence, each layer a chapter. The architecture here doesn't simply shelter, it speaks. You run your hand along a carefully placed stone. It's smooth, rectangular, nestled tightly between its neighbors. No gaps, no lazy mortar jobs. Someone chose this rock specifically for this spot, and the one above it, and the one beside it. Welcome to the golden age of sandstone architecture. During the height of the 13th century, the ancestral Puebloans built with an eye for detail that borders on obsessive. They used sandstone abundant, soft enough to shape, hard enough to endure. Using stone hammers, they chiseled blocks to near-perfect fits. Then they packed the joints with a mix of mud mortar ash and stone. It wasn't just construction, it was choreography. Some walls were veneered with decorative outer layers, polished, even gleaming in the sunlight. Others were more practical, their rougher surfaces hidden within the room. You peer closely and notice fingerprints preserved in the plaster, literal traces of the builders pressed into eternity. There's something poetic about that. And the layouts, not random. Rooms were built with solar alignment in mined doorways and windows catching just the right angles of winter sunlight to warm the interiors. Shade was planned, airflow engineered. You're standing in a sustainable marvel designed before the idea of green building existed. Frank Lloyd Wright, Eat Your Heart Out. Mainstream archaeology celebrates these innovations, especially the rise of the multi-story structures. Some buildings reached 4 stories high, with interconnected rooms, stairways, and even balconies. And the kivas, oh the kivas, circular subterranean, each with a precisely placed ventilation shaft and a deflector stone to manage airflow. They understood draft physics better than your cousin Todd with a YouTube degree. You duck into a kiva now. The air shifts as you descend, suddenly cool and steady. Light filters in through a square hole in the roof, dust particles floating like tiny spirits. The space is perfectly circular, the masonry seamless. You sit on a low bench that runs around the perimeter. It's quiet here, too quiet to be accidental. These weren't just basements or meeting rooms. Kivas were ceremonial chambers, places of ritual, story, perhaps negotiation. Some had roof hatches only reachable by ladder, suggesting exclusivity or secrecy. Others had wall niches that may have held sacred items or snacks. Okay, probably not snacks, but you're hungry and easily distracted. There's a scholarly debate, of course, about how much of this architecture was religious versus practical. Were the kivas always ceremonial, or did they double as dorms? Did the towers you see, narrow vertical structures often detached from main clusters, serve as lookouts, signal posts, or just very fancy chimneys? Historians still argue whether certain cliff structures had astronomical alignments on purpose or by accident. But when you stand in a room that lights up exactly at solstice, it's hard not to believe someone planned it that way. And here's a quirky twist. Some of the walls have tiny windows that don't open to anything, just narrow slits in the masonry, carefully carved. Theories range from ventilation to sound management to spiritual symbolism. One particularly bold archaeologist claimed they were early forms of acoustic tuning chambers. Another said they're just really weird windows. Scientific consensus is elusive. You step back outside the light, stinging after the kiva's embrace. You look up at the towers, the plazas, the apartments, stacked like sandstone puzzle pieces. You feel small, but also oddly at home. This place was designed for people. It embraced them, shaped them, held their fears and laughter within its stone embrace. You pass a dwelling with a raised threshold high enough to trip over unless you know to step carefully. Defensive design, climate control. A joke played on future archaeologists. You don't know, but it feels intentional. That's the theme here, intention. Every room, every wall, every carefully set stone says, we meant to be here, we planned to stay. Even now, long after the fires have gone out, the buildings refuse to collapse. They lean slightly. Yes, some roofs have caved, but most of them are still upright, still watching. You pause by a small window overlooking the canyon. The wind brushes past your face, and for a second, you swear it's saying something. You close your eyes and listen. It's not words. Not quite. Just the soft rustle of time. And then a footstep. You turn startled. No one's there, of course. But for a moment you felt it. Someone walking past, a builder, a mother, a child with a handful of mud about to leave a perfect smear on a half-set wall. You smile and step forward again. These aren't just ruins, they're rooms with memories. And you haven't seen them all yet. You wake to the smell of dust and juniper. The sun is still stretching over the rim of the canyon, golden light threading through the narrow windows of a stone room like fingers through a loom. A soft breeze flutters in cool, dry, and strangely full of memory. You've seen the dwellings, the corn, the kivas. But now your feet guide you towards something quieter, more elusive, and if we're being honest, a bit more desperate. Water. Out here in the high deserts of the Four Corners region, water is more than a necessity. It's a miracle in motion, and chasing it has shaped every choice these cliff dwellers made. You climb to the mesa, top heart thudding, not from fear, but from exertion. You're learning what the people here knew. Intimately, living on the edge of a canyon is good for protection and for scenic views, but terrible for fetching a drink. At the top, the terrain flattens into scrubby fields pocked with rabbit brush and the occasional twisted pinon. But if you know where to look, and by now you do, you begin to see signs, shallow reservoirs lined with stone gentle ditches weaving through patches of soil and catchment basins shaped to intercept snowmelt and rainwater. This is water strategy Mesa Verde style. No grand aqueducts, no fountains or gurgling cisterns, just quiet genius in small places. Historians point to these simple features, check dams, terrace gardens, and rock-lined ditches as evidence of an agricultural people who understood scarcity. And one thing they understood above all, water doesn't just fall. You must find it, coax it, store it, and sometimes pray to it. You follow a channel that guides runoff toward a basin tucked between sandstone outcrops. A trickle of moisture lines the bottom, just enough to wet your fingers. You lick the tip. Earthy, cold, perfect. One particularly clever structure you come across is a seep spring where groundwater filtered through sandstone layers slowly emerges at the surface. These were often hidden behind boulders or shaded by overhang. You can imagine a woman kneeling here, collecting drops in a clay jar, whispering a quiet song as she waited. One quirky archaeological tidbit, some pottery shards found near these springs, suggest the water may have been stored with bits of plant resin or even crushed mineral to preserve it longer. Like prehistoric water purification, minus the Brita filter. But not all stories are so gentle. You trek further and find a dried spring bed, cracked, empty, abandoned. You sit down beside it, dust clinging to your ankles. Tree ring data from this region tells a grim tale. Between 1276 and 1299, a prolonged drought gripped the southwest, a mega drought as it's often called. 23 years with below-average rainfall. That's not just a dry spell, that's an environmental eviction notice. Some villages withered and were left behind. Fields turned to dust. Springs slowed to a whisper, then fell silent. Historians still argue whether this drought was the final blow for Mesa Verde's cliff dwellers or just one more thread in a tangled knot of causes. Climate, social strain, resource depletion. It all blends into one slow-motion collapse. But while we debate it, they lived it. You look down at your dusty palms. The people here didn't simply walk away at the first dry season. They adapted, moved fields, dug deeper, shared stores, probably argued because humans, but kept going until they couldn't. You pass a reservoir carved into bedrock. It's nearly dry now, but you can see the sediment lines on the walls like rings in a bathtub. At one point, this held thousands of gallons of precious water. A village's heartbeat. Some archaeologists believe these water features were communally maintained, implying not just engineering skill, but social cooperation. A shared well is a shared trust. When the rains failed, the stress wasn't just physical, it was emotional, social, spiritual. You glance around. The ground here is littered with tiny pottery shards, fragments too small to reconstruct, but too stubborn to disappear. One bears a faint pattern, a wave or a snake maybe. It's hard to tell. You hold it in your hand, marveling at the delicate paint. Someone made this, then drank from it. Maybe they carried water in it. Maybe it shattered one morning in frustration after another dry day. We'll never know. And yet, we feel it. You make your way back to the cliffs, the sun now higher and harsher. The stone radiates heat. Your lips are dry. Your skin tightens with thirst. It's a reminder that these people lived where many wouldn't even camp. One popular theory suggests that the move into the cliffs was itself a response to water pressures. Better shade, cooler temperatures, slightly improved access to residual moisture. Not a retreat, but a reshuffling, a strategy. Even in decline they adapted, even in silence they endured. You climb down into a cliff dwelling and find a small room, its doorway lower, its interior darker than most. Inside, a ceramic water jar still rests in the corner. It's cracked, but upright. You crouch beside it and whisper, "I get it." Because you do. You understand that water shaped more than gardens. It shaped lives, hopes, stories. And when it began to vanish, so did everything else. The room you're in is cool, hushed, and nearly lightless. Dust motes float like drifting thoughts undisturbed by time. You sit beside the old water jar, letting its emptiness settle into your bones. Then slowly you rise, stretch your aching legs and head toward a narrow passage leading to something deeper, something round. Another kiva. This one is tucked between two larger dwellings and it looks well used. The roof is gone now, but the walls remain sturdy, precise and circular as the moon. You descend the ladder one careful step at a time as shadows rise around you. Inside, the air is different. Still dry, still ancient, but thicker somehow. It's the kind of space that holds breath. You settle onto the stone bench that rings the interior and close your eyes. For a moment, all you hear is your own heartbeat bouncing gently off the curved walls like a drum in a cave. This is not just architecture, it's intention wrapped in silence. The Sipapu sits before you, a small, round hole in the floor. Symbolic, sacred. In many Pueblo origin stories, it's the portal through which the first people emerged into this world from the one below. It's a memory, an anchor, and maybe even a cosmic doorway if you squint hard enough. Historians mostly agree that kivas served ceremonial purposes, rites of passage, solstice celebrations, communal decisions, but their exact functions remain a mystery. Some suggest each clan had its own kiva, others believe they were reserved for the spiritual elite. One more recent theory: they also served as classrooms where elders passed down stories by firelight to children with wide eyes and crumb-covered fingers. You lean back against the wall. Your fingertips trace the faint outline of a petroglyph, a spiral. Always the spiral. It shows up everywhere across the southwest, etched into canyon walls, painted on pots hidden beneath floors. What does it mean? a journey, a migration path, a symbol of the sun. Historians still argue whether it represents movement, rebirth, or just really good graphic design. Suddenly you hear chanting, not real of course, not now, but it rises in your mind with such clarity that you feel the kiva respond. Drums thud low and rhythmic. Voices blend male and female, old and young. Some chant, others hum. One child giggles before being hushed. Smoke spirals up through the roof hatch. Shadows dance on the walls. You're no longer alone. A solstice ceremony, perhaps. Or a harvest rite. Maybe a storytelling night where a matriarch recites the tale of the corn mother and the first fire. You can't understand the words, but you understand their shape. They spiral too, like the petroglyph, like the seasons, like the people themselves who move through time not in lines but in circles. The chanting fades. You open your eyes. The kiva is quiet again, but not empty. You climb out, slowly blinking into the bright sunlight. The contrast stings. The world up here feels louder now, rougher. You walk through the village with new eyes. Every dwelling is positioned in relation to the kiva, not just physically, but emotionally. It's the heart of the place, the chamber where breath, story, and spirit are kept warm in the winter of history. You pause at another mural, this one painted on the exterior wall of a dwelling. Geometric shapes, concentric circles, what might be stylized stars or animals. Some of it feels purely decorative, but some of it feels like instruction. One curious fringe theory proposes that some of these paintings served as calendars recording planting cycles or astronomical events. Others believe they were prayers in pigment meant to activate the wall itself. A few even suggest certain rooms were tuned acoustically to amplify chanting and singing. Yes, there's an actual academic paper about ancient southwestern sound engineering. Welcome to archaeology. As the sun climbs higher, you notice something odd. The positioning of windows and doors casts light into certain rooms only at specific times. In one kiva, a beam of light strikes a small painted mark on the wall at midday. Solstice tracking likely. Coincidence doubtful. You sit beside an elder weaving yucca fibers into rope. She hums softly, nothing ceremonial, just a tune for the fingers to follow. You nod and she nods back as if to say it's all connected. And it is. The cliffs, the corn, the water, the walls, the kivas. Each one reinforces the other, not separate parts, but pieces of one humming, breathing organism. You return once more to the kiva as evening draws close. Shadows stretch longer, birds settle into ledges above. The sipapu stares up at you quiet and open. You think about emergence, about stories passed from mouth to mouth like embers, about how people mark the sacred not with monuments but with rooms that remember you. And when you finally leave the kiva, the wind follows you out, not as a warning, but as a whisper. The cliff dwellers did not just live here, they dreamed here. The morning air smells like corn cakes and sweat. A soft rhythm thumps from deeper inside the cliff dwellings, drum beats distant and steady like a second heartbeat under your own. You follow it, drawn by the pull of celebration. Today is not an ordinary day. The village is alive in a way you haven't seen before. Baskets overflow with squash and beans. Children streak by, faces painted with ochre swirls, giggling as they dodge adults busy preparing for the solstice festival. It's hard not to smile. The whole place hums with anticipation, like the canyon itself is leaning in to listen. You enter a plaza ringed by dwellings. Someone has cleared the center space, sweeping away dust with pine branches. Women stir great clay pots filled with something thick and fragrant. The smell is earthy and sweet roasted turkey stewed with wild onions and sunflower seeds. The kind of dish you'd eat slowly with your fingers while sitting in the sun and forgetting time exists. Nearby, a boy practices his dance steps, his feet thudding against the stone in a rhythm passed down through generations. His arms swing in careful arcs, mimicking the motion of clouds or hawks or possibly turkeys. Because yes, today is also about turkeys. You find them in all corners of the plaza, penned behind woven fences, puffing themselves up, strutting like royalty. Some are decorative, their feathers dyed or arranged in fans for dances. Others, well, you suspect they're heading for the stew pot. Here's a fun historical fact. By the 1200s, turkeys were fully domesticated in the southwest, not just for meat, but for feathers. Feather blankets were warmer than cotton and lasted for years. Some villages even buried their dead wrapped in turkey feather robes, perhaps for warmth on the long journey to the next world. You wander past one woman carefully plucking feathers from a very much alive turkey who seems against all odds unbothered. Maybe it's used to this, maybe it's just playing the long game. The drumming picks up. People begin gathering around the central plaza, forming a wide circle. The dancers emerge, adults and children, both adorned with beads, feathers, face paint, and bells made from carved gourds. Their bodies shimmer with ritual, with memory. One woman carries a long staff wrapped in dyed corn husks. Another holds a basket of seeds, symbols, all of them, of renewal of thanks to the cycle that never ends. And then the dancing begins. You don't know the steps, but you don't need to. The beat speaks a language older than words. The dancers stomp and spin their feet, raising tiny clouds of dust. The sound bounces off the stone walls, echoing like a second drumline from the cliffs themselves. It's beautiful, and at times a little absurd. One dancer stumbles over his own ceremonial tail feathers. A small child tries to mimic the adults, then gives up and does somersaults instead. Laughter ripples through the crowd. Ritual doesn't mean rigid. Now this is sacred, yes, but also joyful. You sit beside an elder, watching with misty eyes and a deeply amused smile. She leans over and says something you don't understand, but the tone is clear. This is how we remember. Later the feast begins. Corn cakes wrapped in squash leaves, beans mashed with herbs, dried berries rehydrated and drizzled with wild honey, and turkey, of course, roasted, shredded, stewed. You watch as families share as food is passed without counting, as no one leaves hungry. Here's something curious. Archaeologists have found remnants of these kinds of feasts in midden heaps, trash piles near old dwellings. Burned bones, cracked pots gnawed, corn cobs, evidence of meals too big to be normal. Some even argue that the presence of specific pottery forms wide-mouthed jars, serving bowls, indicates communal cooking on festival days. And one more delightful tidbit. There's evidence some of these events included fermented beverages, a lightly alcoholic brew made from corn or cactus fruit. Ancient beer. That explains some of the dancing. As twilight slips in, the drums slow. The dancers rest, the children nap with sticky cheeks and feathers tangled in their hair. You sit back and watch the cliffs fade into shadow. The plaza quiets. Smoke rises in lazy spirals. The canyon begins to glow under the silver breath of moonlight. And something settles in you. These people did not just live hard lives, they celebrated them. loudly, colourfully, and often with a handful of turkey feathers. Maybe that's why the loss feels so sharp later, because the life here was so rich. But for now, there is only fullness, laughter, smoke, the hush that follows music. The canyon cradles the sound gently and waits for the next song. The sun breaks gently over the far edge of the mesa, casting long shadows across the canyon walls. Yesterday's festival has faded into soft ash and full bellies. You can still hear the ghost of drumming in your bones, but today the cliffs feel watchful. You wander deeper into the network of dwellings away from the plaza and feasting grounds into a quiet bend in the canyon. Here, nestled beneath a high overhang and partially hidden by a curtain of stone, rise the towers. Yes, towers. Not just two-story homes or elevated storage rooms. Actual towers. Vertical, narrow, multi-level structures that seem at first glance like the medieval dreams of a people who never met a drawbridge. You crane your neck upward. One of them leans slightly but still holds firm. Its walls are smooth, well-fitted, and distinctly different from the homes you've seen elsewhere in the cliffside city. It's beautiful and also mysterious. Historians still argue whether these towers were ceremonial, defensive, residential, or just architectural flexing. They appear in various places across Mesa Verde and the wider region, sometimes standing alone on the mesa tops, sometimes integrated into cliff dwellings, always slightly out of place like punctuation in the middle of a sentence. You walk a slow circle around one, now noticing the lack of obvious doorways. Instead, there are small square openings like windows, but oddly placed. Too high for casual viewing, too low for light. Theories abound. Some archaeologists believe these towers were observation posts used to scan the surrounding land for visitors, raiders, or incoming weather. Others suggest a spiritual purpose aligned with astronomical events. A few have argued the towers are symbolic representations of migration stories, ascending structures that mirror the emergence from lower worlds. And then, of course, there's the classic fringe interpretation, alien landing beacons. You chuckle to yourself, sure, because intergalactic travelers would definitely visit Earth to observe ancient corn festivals and build moderately tall sandstone tubes. Still, the ambiguity is part of the magic. You climb a nearby ladder carefully and peek into the second floor of a partially preserved tower. The room inside is tight, barely enough space to sit cross-legged. A pile of ash suggests a small fire once burned here. A niche in the wall holds the fractured remnants of a ceramic bowl. You exhale the air, stirring motes of dust that haven't moved in centuries. Could someone have kept watch here? Meditated hidden? Or maybe this was a secret meeting place, a space for whispers and choices made in the hush between drums. One detail intrigues you. The construction quality of the towers is often higher than that of the adjacent rooms. Tighter joints, straighter walls. This wasn't a rush job, it was careful, deliberate. The labor of someone trying to make a point. And what's more, many towers were connected to kivas by tunnels. Yes, tunnels. One partially collapsed passageway near the tower entrance hints at a subterranean link to a nearby ceremonial chamber. Archaeologists have found similar connections at other sites. What for ritual escape routes? Secret games of ancient hide-and-seek historians still don't know, and that uncertainty is strangely comforting, because it reminds you the past is not a puzzle to be solved, it's a person to be listened to. And sometimes that person speaks in riddles You walk back out into the sunlight and let your fingers trail the tower's base. It's cool, quiet, solid. Maybe it was a bell tower, you think, not for sound, but for presence. A vertical declaration. We are here, we are watching, we are still becoming. Farther along the cliff you find another tower, this one with a mural painted just above its entrance. Spirals again. Human figures with raised arms. A deer stylized with elongated legs and wide eyes. Perhaps a story, or a warning, or an inside joke for which we've lost the punchline. And above it all, the sky yawns wide and blue, indifferent and majestic. You sit with your back against the tower and let the day drift. There's something deeply human in building upward, whether it's a skyscraper, a cathedral, or a tower carved into a cliff wall. The impulse is the same: to rise, to reach, to be seen. Even in the canyon's quietest corner, these towers insist this life meant something. You close your eyes and imagine the view from the top, the wind tugging at your hair, the valley unfolding below, the slow sweep of the sun as it touches stone and memory alike. And you wonder who stood there last. You descend from the tower, your legs stiff and slightly wobbly, your hands still chalked with the ghost of sandstone. The trail back to the heart of Cliff Palace curves like a question, one that's starting to whisper a little louder. What were they afraid of? Because if the towers hinted at tension, the walls you pass now speak it fluently. Homes here feel more fortified than festive. Entryways are higher, narrower, often requiring a climb or a crouch. Some doors seem designed less to welcome guests and more to repel intruders. You duck through one and notice the room inside is small, dark and windowless. The only light slips in through a crack near the ceiling. It's not just cozy, it's bunker-like. You step back out into the canyon's light and scan the cliffs around you. The dwellings are clustered tight, overlapping, huddled. These are not the broad, breezy plaza homes of earlier centuries. These structures are closing in. Historians see it too. Around 1250 CE, a shift begins. Villages shrink, populations consolidate into fewer, denser cliff dwellings. Rooms multiply upward and inward rather than out across the mesa. There's a tightening, a turning inward, and it's not just an architectural preference. It smells like anxiety. What caused it? That depends on which scholar you ask and what time of day. Some point to increased raiding. Perhaps as water sources shrank and farmland became strained, neighboring groups began encroaching. Others argue internal conflict fractures within a once unified society splintering into rivalry. Still others believe it wasn't humans at all, but the slow crush of environmental stress, crop failure, famine, disease. And of course there's the ever-intriguing fringe theory, interdimensional disruption. Yes, one paper suggested that disturbances in the Earth's electromagnetic field might have driven mass paranoia. A little light on evidence, a little heavy on science fiction, but certainly more exciting than blaming bad rainfall. You walk past a storeroom, its door sealed with stone slabs. Inside, its rumored archaeologists found not just food, but weapons. Stone axes, projectile points, blades chipped from obsidian. Tools, yes, but tools that can turn into something else with the right or wrong intent. One unsettling fact: a few cliff dwellings from this era contain evidence of violent death. Scattered bones, burned rooms. In some cases, entire families appear to have been killed. In place, their remains undisturbed for centuries. You pause at the threshold of one such room and don't enter. The light doesn't reach very far in there. Historians still debate how widespread such violence was. Some believe these were rare, tragic anomalies. Others argue they were signs of growing desperation, a slow unraveling of social fabric. But one thing is clear, people here were preparing for trouble. You climb to a high ledge overlooking the main canyon. From this vantage, you can see multiple cliff dwellings at once, like scattered nests tucked into the rock. Some are connected by visible footpaths, others hidden entirely, unless you know exactly where to look. They're watchful, strategic, defensive, and yet it doesn't feel like a war zone. There are no battlements, no organized militias. Life here continues. Children play corn, grows drums still sound during festivals, but the joy is folded now inside something else. A quiet tension, a holding of breath. You imagine what it must have been like to live under that invisible weight, to wake each morning and scan the horizon, to ration your food more carefully, to measure your words in council meetings, to wonder if the family in the next alcove is truly still an ally. You pick your way back down past another narrow doorway fitted with a slab of shaped stone, a makeshift door, strong, heavy, definitely not decorative. A group of women passes you carrying baskets of pine nuts and dried beans. They greet you with nods but speak in hushed tones. You notice one carries a child swaddled tightly against her back, eyes wide silent. That child's world is small and alert. It knows already that loudness is dangerous, and yet the people endure. They continue planting, weaving, building. They paint the same spirals. They gather in kivas to tell stories that end in light. Even when the world seems dimmer, it's not collapse, not yet. It's resilience holding the line. One kiva you enter has a fire pit still charred from its last use. On the wall beside it, a handprint in black pigment, bold, alone. A signature, a warning, a farewell no one knows. But the placement feels deliberate, not art, declaration. You step back into the light and sit on a stone ledge, legs swinging freely above the canyon floor. The towers were for watching, the sealed doors were for guarding, and the silence creeping into the corners that perhaps was for surviving. You breathe in. The cliffs feel a little closer, and the air a little more tense. The wind has changed. It moves through the canyon with less softness now, threading through the stone dwellings like a rumor. It doesn't howl yet, but it carries a certain stillness that isn't quite silence. It's more like waiting. You find yourself wandering the outskirts of the cliff dwellings, climbing to a place where the trees thin out, where ancient pinon and juniper twist in gnarled quiet. You stop beside one, a tree that's half dead, half alive, its bark split and bleeding sap. You run your hand over its weathered surface and it speaks without speaking. You're standing next to a timekeeper, because this tree or one like it has become part of a modern miracle of science dendrochronology, tree ring dating, the science of silence in a way. Each ring a year, each variation a climate confession. Wet years make wide rings. Dry years, thin strained lines that look like whispers etched in wood. And what do the trees around Mesa Verde whisper? Drought, a long one. Mainstream historians point to a series of droughts across the 12th and 13th centuries, but the period between 1276 and 1299 stands out like a cracked rib in the timeline, and this isn't just a dry summer or two, it's 2 decades and change of thirst. Crops failed, springs dried, even the clouds, it seems, forgot how to weep. You close your eyes and listen to the wind again. It says nothing, That's the problem. The fields you pass on your return to the cliffside are still laid out in tidy rows, but the corn is stunted, the squash vines brittle, and the beans, well, they look like they gave up before trying. You imagine the farmers kneeling here, fingers in the dirt, whispering to the soil, as if pleading with an old friend who's stopped answering letters. You visit a granary built into a narrow crevice in the rock. It's ingenious, elevated, shaded with ventilation holes and thick plastered walls to keep out rodents. You pry open the stone slab and peek inside, still full. That's what catches you off guard. Despite the drought, the people didn't starve, not immediately. They had storage, reserve, planning. There's evidence some families stockpiled food aggressively, turning rooms into silos. They had foresight. But you also sense something else, desperation. Because while the granaries held, the population didn't. People began to leave. One family here, another there. The census of the cliffs, the invisible roll call of laughter, footsteps, shared meals, started to thin. Historians still argue whether the drought was the final blow or merely one piece of a wider unraveling. Was it the straw, the spark, or the tide? Some argue the drought was the visible excuse for deeper fractures, social tension, ideological division power, struggles cloaked in ceremonial robes. You wander back into the cliff dwellings and everything feels slightly off. Rooms are empty, not ruined, not sacked, just paused. A ladle still hanging. A corn cob half-eaten. A bowl tipped slightly as though it was placed down in a moment of distraction and never picked up again. And then there's the ash. In one small dwelling near the kiva, the floor is layered in soot. The hearth is cold but recent, within a lifetime of the final days here. You kneel, sift the ash between your fingers. It's not the ash of fire alone, it's the ash of ritual. In some Pueblo traditions, ash is used to mark endings, to cleanse, to close. You start to wonder, did they burn certain rooms deliberately as a farewell? Did they seal doors not to protect what was inside, but to let it rest? Nearby you find another tree, long dead. Its stump hollowed and gnarled. This one has been cut cleanly, no decay, no lightning, no rot. A human hand did this. Probably for fuel. Probably because winters were colder food, harder to cook, and survival doesn't wait for reverence. And yet the tree still stands. Sort of. Like the people. Some archaeologists believe social cohesion began to fracture during the drought years. Small communities that once shared resources may have tightened into protective knots. You imagine the difficult conversations. Should we give some of our corn to the village down the canyon? Do we invite them to the solstice ceremony? Do we share water? And when the answer became no, something subtle broke. Not loudly, not violently, just irrevocably. You pass a wall with faint red handprints, dozens of them all clustered all about the same size. Children likely, a mural, a memory, a moment when they were told to press their hands to the wall and leave something of themselves behind. You place your hand beside one and it nearly fits. And that's the sharpest ache of all. They were us, not symbols, not myths, people, with gardens and jokes and bad knees and hopes that stretched just a little farther than their water did. You stand at the edge of the cliff and look out. Below the canyon sways in heat haze. Above the sky is blameless. You close your eyes and for a moment you imagine a family sitting at their final evening meal. They don't say it's the last. They don't have to. They eat slowly. They don't speak much. but they chew the corn soft and they let the silence grow roots. The air tastes different now. Still dry, still sharp, but quieter somehow, as if the canyon itself is bracing for something it doesn't want to say aloud. You walk with slower steps, the soles of your feet scuffing through centuries. And above you, the sandstone overhang looms not as shelter today, but as shadow. You're watching it happen. The slow goodbye, but it's not dramatic. Not yet. That's the thing, there's no grand exodus. No burning torches, no procession of weeping families descending into the canyon. It's quieter than that. Slower, you start to notice it in the little things. A grinding stone left behind, too heavy to carry, but too useful to abandon unless you didn't need it anymore. A half-finished pot, still soft around the rim, as though the potter walked away mid-sentence. Ladders missing from certain upper-story homes, their notches worn but unused. Dust accumulating in doorways. Historians sometimes call this gradual abandonment, though the phrase feels oddly sterile. What it really was, it was migration without fanfare, the slow unweaving of a life. One family moves away, then another and another, not all at once, but over years, maybe decades. You sit in a half-collapsed room and imagine what those final seasons were like. There's still food in the storage room, but less than before. The water is further away. The fields yield enough, but barely. And the neighbors? They're quieter now. You haven't seen their fire smoke in a few mornings. You might wonder, are they visiting family, or are they gone? Historians still debate the pace of the departure. Some argue it was staggered community by community. Others believe it happened in waves like the ebb and pull of breath. There's no clear line between living here and not, only clues, like the road segments. Mesa Verde is connected to a vast web of ancient roads, some as wide as modern highways carved through bedrock, pointing like compass needles toward other great settlements, Chaco Canyon, Aztec ruins, and further still into what we now call Arizona and New Mexico. These weren't random trails, they were arteries. And now, they're being walked again. But this time in one direction, south. You follow the imagined footsteps. A mother carrying her youngest child bundled in a woven cradle. A father gripping a digging stick worn to the grain. A grandmother walking with one hand on a younger cousin's shoulder for balance. Their backs are to the canyon. Their steps steady, not rushed. Because they are not fleeing. They are leaving. It's different. You pause beside a collapsed granary and spot something small nestled in the corner, a child's toy carved from a bit of wood, shaped roughly like a rabbit. You reach out to touch it, then stop. It's been waiting too long to be picked up again. One fringe theory, mostly ignored by mainstream archaeology, suggests that this departure wasn't about survival at all, that it was prophecy, a spiritual calling to leave, to begin again. Some descendants of the Pueblo people speak of migration as a sacred cycle guided by divine rhythm. When the land no longer welcomes you, don't fight it, you honor it, and you move on. That would explain the lack of chaos here, the absence of burned walls, of slaughtered livestock, of barricades, or desperate defenses. Instead, what you find are homes left with a strange tenderness. Doors sealed, ash spread, handprints pressed onto walls, not in panic, but in parting. You pass a room with a flat stone altar, likely ceremonial. On it sits a row of small stones arranged in a crescent, as if meant to mirror the moon. A final offering, a quiet signature. You'll never know. But the respect is palpable. There's no looting, no vandalism, just time settling in like wind-borne dust. You climb again to the mesa's edge, the same place where voices once gathered to watch the sun rise. You imagine the council meeting here, elders, hunters, weavers, priests, debating, wondering, choosing. Is it time? Where next? What do we carry and what do we let go? The cliff behind you still holds the echoes. You listen to them, not the loud ones, but the almost sounds. The shuffle of feet, the creak of rope, the whisper of goodbye. A pottery shard cracks under your heel, not from carelessness, but from the inevitability of walking. The people of Mesa Verde did not vanish. They became motion. They became the road, and every step they took from here forward was not erasure, but continuation. You stand very still. The canyon behind you breathes its slow breath. The road ahead waits, and in between them you hear it, not silence, but decision. The fire is small tonight. You sit with a family, mother, father, 2 children, and an elder whose eyes have seen more seasons than most pottery has cracks. They speak quietly, mostly in gestures. The words are few but warm. You're not part of their world, not really, but they've made space for you beside the hearth, just as they've made space for what's coming. It is their last night in the cliffs. They know it, you know it. Even the fire seems to know, flickering low, as if reluctant to consume more wood. The meal is simple: roasted squash, boiled corn, a final handful of dried berries brought out from the storage jar like a secret. No feast, no ritual, just nourishment, fuel for the road, because tomorrow they will leave, not all at once. Not like the stories love to imagine, with everyone gathering in the plaza for one tearful goodbye. No, that would be too theatrical for real people. More likely, they'll rise before dawn, pack quietly, and disappear into the soft edges of morning. Still tonight is a kind of ceremony. The father sharpens a digging stick. Not urgently, just carefully. The mother checks the straps of her water jar, then rechecks them. The children don't ask questions, though they seem to sense that sleep will not come easily. You walk outside with the elder. She moves slowly, leaning on a stick carved with years of use. She stops at the edge of the cliff, looks down at her village, and exhales through her nose. You stand beside her, not speaking. It's beautiful still, even in its quietness. Maybe more so. She reaches into a small pouch tied around her waist and scatters something into the air, tiny seeds or crushed petals or just dust. She doesn't explain, and you don't ask. She turns to go back inside, but you stay, because this is the moment. This is what history books can't capture. Not just the when, but the feeling of it. The soft ache of departure. The deep, dignified silence of choosing to walk away from something sacred, not out of failure, but out of rhythm. The fire inside flickers against the stone walls, casting shadows that dance for no audience. A few tools remain in their places. A child's woven sandal lies beside the door. You suspect they'll leave it behind. Maybe it's outgrown. Or maybe it's an offering to the house. In some Pueblo traditions, spirits linger in places long after the people have gone. Not haunting, but watching. Holding memory like a bowl. Maybe that's why so many doors here were sealed with stone when families left. A gesture of respect, a closing. You watch as the father quietly places a handful of maize in a small crack between stones. Not waste, a gift for those who remain, or for what remains of them. Historians note that some cliff dwellings appear strangely intact even centuries later, tools left in their places, food in storage rooms sealed rather than destroyed. This wasn't abandonment. It was transition. A slow, intentional uncoupling from place. You look up and see stars crowding the sky, more than you've ever counted. A river of light arching above the canyon, as if to guide those below along their path. They would have walked by starlight. Cooler than day, quieter, gentler on tired feet. You imagine them descending ladders in the dark, whispering not from fear, but from reverence. Moving southward toward other mesas, other canyons, other places where corn could grow and stories could root. You sit again by the fire. The children have fallen asleep. The mother is plaiting a yucca rope with automatic fingers, eyes half closed. The father stares into the flames. The elder has dozed her chin, resting on her chest, a faint smile curling beneath her cracked lips. Nothing dramatic, just rest. Tomorrow they'll take what they can carry. They'll leave the rest for the wind and the stone, and they'll vanish, not from history, but into it. Not gone, just elsewhere. You lie back on the stone floor, hard but familiar now. The fire pops gently beside you. Above the opening in the ceiling shows you a sliver of night sky. One star blinks, then another. And in that moment you understand something that no artifact, no carbon dating, no satellite survey could teach you. The ancestral Puebloans didn't disappear. They moved, they evolved, they whispered goodbye, not with panic, but with grace. And Mesa Verde, it didn't fall, it simply exhaled. The fire is cold. You rise early the way they would have before the sky even thinks of light. The cave walls are dim shapes, and the silence is so thick you can hear your own pulse echo in your ears. The dwelling is empty now. The family has gone, not just out gathering firewood, not visiting neighbors, gone. You step outside and the canyon greets you like an abandoned stage. The performance is over, but the backdrop remains. Smoke from last night's fire has long dispersed. The sandals, the tools, the food, everything that could be carried is carried. What's left is what they chose to leave. You feel it. A kind of stillness that's different from regular silence. This one has weight, presence. It hangs in the air like a word left unsaid. You walk through the corridors of Cliff Palace, through doorways now used only by wind, past kivas where no one chants, past water jars filled only with dust. There's no decay here, not in the usual sense. The place isn't crumbling, it's just waiting. But waiting for what historians still puzzle over it. If this was a migration, where exactly did they go? Why didn't they return? In the following seasons, were they forced out by drought? Did spiritual beliefs compel them to move on? Was it a combination of everything, weather, food, politics, faith, all braided into one long decision? One thing is clear, it wasn't chaos. There are no signs of siege, no bones scattered across the plazas, no doors hacked down. If anything, there's a strange order to the absence. Some rooms are sealed with stones, so tightly placed you'd think the mason expected to return next week. Some storage pits are full untouched. Some kivas have their entry hatches carefully covered. One quirky theory, that sealing the kivas was a form of spiritual burial, not for the dead, but for the space itself. A way of closing the chapter like laying a book gently face down. You sit on a cool stone and watch the light slowly pour into the canyon. A few insects buzz lazily past your face. A bird calls from somewhere higher up the cliff, surprised maybe to hear no reply. The village is now held together by shadows and echoes. You reach a room with pottery still stacked neatly inside. Bowls, water jars, a small painted seed jar with a stylized sun etched into its lid. You lift it gently, blow off the dust. Inside, nothing. Emptiness made sacred by careful intent. There's no sign of looting, no breakage, no carelessness, only the kind of pause that feels permanent. You pass a mural faded but still discernible. Stylized figures in a spiral hands joined walking in a circle that gets tighter and tighter toward the center. A migration symbol most likely, or a calendar, or a prayer, or all three. And here's the part that historians can't quite pin down: the people who left Mesa Verde didn't vanish. Their descendants are still very much alive. The Hopi, the Zuni, the Tewa, the Acoma. These communities carry stories, languages, ceremonies and identities that reach back to the stone and soil of Mesa Verde. Oral traditions speak of migration, of emergence of following spirit beings across landscapes. Some of these stories include the cliffs, others pass over them like rivers around rock. It's easy in the stillness of these ruins to forget that they are not tombs. They are beginnings. The people didn't disappear. They relocated, they transformed. You place the small seed jar back where you found it. Let the dust settle over it again gently. It isn't yours to carry. You pass one last room with a faint footprint pressed into the hardened mud floor, a child's by the size of it. You crouch, press your palm nearby. Not an exact match, but close enough that it sends a ripple through your chest. Time doesn't erase us. It just layers us. You walk once more through the narrow alleys, past the kivas, the towers, the sealed doorways. The wind picks up as you reach the edge of the canyon. It nudges you forward as if saying, "Now you know." So go, and you do. You walk the same trail they walked, stone to sand, mesa to plain. You don't know where you're headed, but you carry their silence with you. Not as a question anymore, but as an answer. By the time the sun climbs fully above the canyon rim, the silence is complete. You stand once more at the heart of Cliff Palace, looking at it not as a city, not even as a ruin, but as an exhale made solid, one long, slow breath held for centuries in stone. It's quiet, but not dead. That difference matters, because even now you can feel the pulse of what was. It's not noise, it's not movement, it's memory, and it's everywhere. You press your hand to the cool stone of a dwelling wall and think of the last hand that touched it, not with curiosity like yours, but with care. Someone smoothed this mortar. Someone pressed their palm here in farewell. You can almost see it, a woman carrying a sleeping child, pausing to rest her head against the stone one final time. A man closing a doorway with rough stones, wiping his hands on his tunic. A child waving goodbye to a favorite window. And then they left. And the cliffs. They listened. You walk slowly now, retracing your steps through the architecture that no longer shelters bodies but still holds story. The towers, the kivas, the staircases chiseled into bare rock. You begin to notice things you missed before: a carved pattern on a ceiling beam so faint it's almost a shadow. A pair of handprints just below the roofline hidden behind a slab of wall. A scattering of corn kernels fossilized into the earth, still arranged in a tiny spiral. Traces, whispers, not of tragedy but of transition. This wasn't collapse. That's the wrong word. It carries too much of finality, too much of doom. What happened here was change, chosen perhaps reluctantly, but chosen. Historians still wrestle with it. Some cling to dramatic explanations, famine, war, catastrophe. Others argue for complex systems failure, environmental stress, social stratification, diminishing returns on local resources, and maybe all those factors played their part. But maybe, just maybe, the people of Mesa Verde were following a rhythm that isn't ours. Maybe they knew it was time. There's a Hopi concept called hopoko, the idea that movement, especially migration, is part of spiritual balance. To stay too long in one place is to unbalance the world. So you move not because you've failed, but because the land has given you all it can. And when you hear that something clicks. These were not people escaping disaster, they were people keeping a promise. You climb once more to a lookout ledge high above the canyon. Below, the cliff dwellings sprawl in dusty quiet. Not lifeless, just paused. In the stillness you picture it, hundreds of people weaving, cooking, laughing, children darting between kivas, priests marking the solstice with shadows and song, families arguing about chores and trading jokes about lazy turkeys. All of that still here, just beneath the dust. And still no one returned. That's the part that lingers, even after the drought passed, even after the rains came again. No one came back to stay. The people didn't rebuild. They didn't revive the cliff cities. They left them intact, and they let them rest. Why? Maybe because to return would be to undo the ending. And endings, if done well, deserve to be left in peace. You feel that now. The sense that this place, this marvel of human ingenuity, resilience, and beauty, was never meant to be eternal in form, just in story. And stories don't need preservation. They need retelling. As you descend back toward the floor of the village, you pass a final room. One you hadn't entered before. Its door is slightly ajar, just wide enough to see inside. A single bowl sits on a shelf, still upright, not cracked, not empty. It holds a pinch of ash, nothing more. Was it a fire offering a final meal, or just something no one could bear to take? You leave it undisturbed. As you make your way toward the canyon rim, the wind stirs behind you. It doesn't sound like words, but it sounds like intention. And that's enough. Mesa Verde didn't fall. It was released. And the silence it left behind, that's not absence. It's a kind of reverence. The stone walls don't echo with what was lost. They whisper what was carried forward. The path you follow now is no longer cut into stone, but into memory. You've left the cliff dwellings behind, the kivas, the towers, the granaries filled with ghost grain. As you rise onto the mesa top, the canyon slowly folds itself closed behind you. And yet strangely, it doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like the start of a wider conversation. Because just beyond the cliffs there are voices still speaking, not in ruins, in people. You arrive at a small modern Pueblo far south of Mesa Verde, beneath a sky just as vast. The buildings here are low and rectangular, made of adobe and patience. The air smells of roasting corn and juniper smoke. The rhythm is different, yes, but the thread feels unbroken. You're welcomed not with ceremony, but with casual kindness. A nod, a seat, a bowl of stew handed over with no questions asked. And, slowly, stories begin to emerge. You sit with a man whose eyes track the movement of clouds like scripture. He tells you of migration, not as history, but as bloodline, of ancestors who walked not away from something, but towards something else, toward balance, toward spiritual realignment. You listen as a woman draws a spiral in the dirt with a stick. She says it's not a map of places, but of lessons. Each turn is a return, she whispers, as though confiding in the earth. These are the descendants, not in the way a family tree charts neat little boxes, but in the way language carries cadence and recipes echo forgotten gardens, in the way songs bend in familiar patterns and prayers are still offered in the direction of cliffs no longer seen, but still felt. The Hopi, the Zuni, the Tiwa, the Acoma, others too, each with their own voice, each with threads leading back through time like roots through stone. Mainstream archaeologists struggled for decades to connect Mesa Verde's cliff dwellers to modern Pueblo peoples. At first, they doubted the links. The timeline seemed messy, the oral histories too poetic, too vague. But over time, the weight of evidence grew. Pottery styles, architectural echoes, genetic markers, and the oral tradition, they never stopped speaking. One fringe theory, oddly elegant, posits that these people knew archaeology would fail them, that they encoded their histories in ritual instead of ruins, knowing that stone could crumble, but stories could walk. You believe it now, because when you ask about Mesa Verde directly, the elders don't give you dates. They don't mention dendrochronology. They talk about ancestors who listened, who left when it was time, who followed the stars and the wind and the hunger of spirit. They tell you, we still carry them. And you realize something deep and still. Mesa Verde never truly went silent. Its voice just moved homes. You follow one family as they prepare a ritual offering, painted cornmeal placed gently in a clay bowl. It's not reenactment, it's not performance, it's continuity. The bowl is handed to a young girl no more than 7 who walks it to the center of the plaza with quiet seriousness. She places it down, then smiles. A gesture taught not just by instruction, but by lineage. This is how cultures endure, not by clinging to the past, but by folding it into the present like a braid. You sit again under a low awning, sipping cool water from a gourd ladle. The stories drift in like wind through cottonwood leaves. And you begin to see the arc. The people of the cliffs didn't vanish, they dispersed, they blended, they adapted, they became grandparents, potters, dancers, teachers. They became echoes made solid, they became myth and meal and morning, and here they are. You glance down at your hands, dusty, tired, and somehow more aware now than when this journey began. You've touched stones, yes, but you've also touched continuation. History tends to love drama, collapse, conquest, catastrophe. But this is quieter. A decision made over dinner, a kiva sealed gently, a child's handprint on a wall that never crumbled. You look up and catch the eye of the elder who welcomed you. He doesn't say anything, just lifts his chin in a gesture that says plainly, "Now you know." And you do. Mesa Verde didn't die, it walked forward. The silence didn't last forever. Not the true kind anyway. After the people walked away southward, earthward, forward, Mesa Verde waited. Winds swept through empty windows. Snakes curled beneath sun-warmed stones. Rain fell in slow seasons. Then not at all. And then came the footsteps. New ones. Centuries passed before anyone cared to climb back into those sacred alcoves, to poke around the sealed doors, to ask the stone questions it wasn't necessarily ready to answer. But curiosity, like water, always finds its way in. It began slowly. A wandering trader here, a Navajo shepherd there. The Ute people whose territory this had become knew the cliffs knew their hush. They called them something like ancestral, though not in the way archaeologists would later try to quantify. The ruins were not forgotten. They were just respected. And then came the Victorians. You feel the shift in the air just thinking about it. Gone are the yucca sandals and soot-stained murals. Now it's bowler hats, wool trousers, stiff collars, and the kind of moustaches that could block out the sun. The 1800s had arrived. In 1888, two cowboys, a rancher named Richard Wetherill and his brother-in-law, Charlie Mason, were out looking for stray cattle. As the story goes, they chased a missing cow across the snowy mesa and ended up peering over a cliff edge. And there it was, Cliff Palace. They were stunned. Imagine riding a dusty trail for days and suddenly discovering a city built into the rock untouched, whispering through the stone. It must have felt like finding Atlantis with a saddlebag full of jerky. They climbed down, no archaeologist's toolkit in hand, just ropes, grit, and awe. And so began the rediscovery. Of course, discovery is a problematic word. The Wetherills didn't discover Cliff Palace, and they just brought it to the attention of people with newspapers, grant money, and questionable ethics. The Ute and Navajo had known of the ruins all along. The Hopi and Zuni could have told stories that mapped the whole place better than any topographic survey. Still, once the secret was out, it spread like wildfire. Soon the cowboys weren't the only ones climbing ladders and poking into kivas. Academics, collectors, gentlemen adventurers. You can practically hear the rustle of crinolines and the clatter of tripods echoing through the canyon. And with them came the shovels. You walk through Cliff Palace now with new eyes. Imagine it as it was then, pots removed from walls, doors opened, rooms dug up, every object catalogued or stolen, depending on who was doing the handling. One strange detail, some early explorers thought the dwellings were built by a lost European tribe. A few even claimed they were the work of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. And of course, no colonial fantasy would be complete without the obligatory nod to Atlantis. Historians now roll their eyes. But in the late 19th century, America was hungry for a past that felt ancient and preferably not indigenous. They wanted grandeur without context, mystery without meaning. And Mesa Verde gave it to them. You find an old photograph, sepia-toned edges curled, showing a Victorian woman in a bustle standing beneath a kiva roof, parasol in hand. She looks out of place and entirely smug. You wonder if she brought lunch, or just judgment. But it wasn't all spectacle. Some genuinely wanted to preserve, to study, to understand. The Wetherills themselves tried to protect artifacts from looters. They contacted museums. They documented what they saw. In a way, their efforts were the beginning of American archaeology. In another way, they were the start of its bad habits. Still, without their notes, without their maps, we might not know the layout of the ruins as they stood before modern intervention. And that's worth remembering. One museum in Sweden, oddly enough, holds thousands of Mesa Verde artifacts, souvenirs, from early expeditions funded by wealthy European patrons. Turquoise beads, bone tools, painted pots that once sat beside fires now long extinguished. You sigh. History is full of hands reaching too quickly. And yet, you're grateful the place wasn't leveled, grateful it was too awkward, too remote, too well built to be easily hauled away. Eventually, the noise of all this attention reached Washington. In 1906, Mesa Verde was officially declared a national park, the first dedicated specifically to preserving the works of an indigenous people. A small step, but a significant one. You imagine the cliffs watching it all with tired amusement, cowboys, scientists, tourists in corsets, cameras the size of wagons, all standing in the footprint of people who built without fanfare and left without farewell. The silence by then had been broken, but the dignity remained. And now you're here, walking the same stone, hearing both the quiet and the noise, understanding at last that rediscovery is not about reclaiming, it's about listening. You hear the story before you see the path. A rancher, a cow, a wrong turn, a gasp. That's how it begins, like a parable wrapped in denim. In December of 1888, Richard Wetherill, a cattleman with a sharp eye and a lot of open range, chased a stray cow across the snowy mesa. The animal had disappeared into the pine scrub, and when he crested the canyon rim to follow her tracks, what he saw stopped him cold. A city in the cliffs, hollow windows peering back like eyes. He and his brother-in-law, Charlie Mason, were among the first Euro-Americans to truly look at Cliff Palace and recognize its significance. Before this, the ruins had been known to the local Ute people, who respectfully avoided them. To them, these were places heavy with memory, not to be poked at with sticks. But Wetherill was different. He didn't see danger. He saw history. And let's be honest, opportunity. You walk now in his imagined footsteps, descending into the canyon along the trail he later widened into something walkable. You can picture him, rope coiled over one shoulder, boots crunching into frost breath, hanging in the cold air. And behind his eyes, questions or maybe a little ambition. In the early days, Wetherill camped right in the ruins. Not out of disrespect, he actually admired the craftsmanship, but because there wasn't a Hilton nearby. He documented everything meticulously, sketches, notes, maps, and he wrote letters to museums and universities inviting scholars to come see what he'd found. One particularly dramatic quote written in his journal: "I felt like I was the first man to see the fingerprints of a vanished civilization, romantic and wildly inaccurate, but forgivable." Soon other adventurers followed, some with notebooks, some with crowbars. You follow a ledge trail into Spruce Tree House, another cliff dwelling the Wetherills explored. It's one of the best preserved in the park, an architectural echo so intact it feels almost theatrical. Inside you can still see soot on the ceilings, still feel the cool breath of the kivas. And you remember, it wasn't Wetherill who broke the silence. It was the world behind him. He tried to be respectful, at least by 19th century standards, but once word got out, the canyon filled with every flavor of curiosity seeker, pot hunters, amateur archaeologists, souvenir collectors. People who saw ancient cities and thought, "I bet that bowl would look great on my mantle." You stop at a storage room that had once been filled with corn. Today it's empty, not just from time, but from removal. One particularly colourful visitor, a Swedish aristocrat named Gustaf Nordenskjöld, arrived in 1891, met the Wetherills, and quickly began shipping crates of Mesa Verde artifacts back to Europe. Ceramics, tools, bones, yes, bones. He saw himself as a scientist preserving history for posterity. Others saw a well-dressed looter. Either way, he beat American museums to the punch. His actions caused such an uproar that they eventually spurred the US government to create laws protecting Native American cultural sites. So, small victories by way of moral disasters. You imagine Gustaf standing in the kiva you're in now, fingering a ceremonial ladle while sipping tea from a silver flask. It's not hard. And here's something oddly human. Wetherill himself grew frustrated with the chaos he'd unleashed. He dreamed of a museum right there on the mesa, something run by locals, by caretakers. He wanted to preserve, not plunder, but the momentum was against him. Eventually, the federal government stepped in. In 1906, thanks in part to the lobbying of preservationists and no small amount of public outrage, President Theodore Roosevelt signed the Antiquities Act, creating Mesa Verde National Park. It was the first park in U.S. history set aside to preserve works of human culture, not just nature. You look around at the cleaned-up paths, the wooden railings, the discreet plaques. The silence here now is not wild, it's curated, but that doesn't mean it's empty. And let's not forget the cowboy himself. Wetherell died young, killed in 1910 under disputed circumstances while working at another ruin site in Chaco Canyon. Some say it was a land dispute, others say it was a misunderstanding that turned violent. Either way, his legacy is tangled. A cowboy who loved ruins, a discoverer who couldn't protect what he'd discovered, a man who looked into the cliffs and saw meaning and accidentally rang the dinner bell for those who only saw merchandise. You walk back to the cliff edge and look down. The cow never came back, they say, but history did. And it's been mooing at us ever since. You turn from the tidy railings and the gift shop signs back toward the shadowed edge of the cliff, the place where the canyon holds its breath. But today you're not alone. A man crouches by a doorway brushing dust from stone with something that looks suspiciously like a toothbrush. Another kneels near a hearth measuring angles with a clipboard and laser level. Farther up, someone photographs a kiva from a wobbly aluminum ladder, their face lit by the screen of a digital tablet. Welcome to early archaeology with Wi-Fi, but it wasn't always this clean. You rewind the scene in your mind, scrubbing away the plastic markers and polished signage. Picture this place in the early 1900s. No safety ropes, no preservation training, just picks, shovels, and a burning need to find something. This was the era of pot hunters and skeleton swindlers. You stroll into a room once excavated by such enthusiasts, not trained professionals, but amateurs with just enough enthusiasm to be dangerous. In the early years after Mesa Verde's rediscovery, many came not to preserve, but to collect, to dig deep, to take home a piece of mystery. And dig they did, with trowels, pickaxes, spoons, and occasionally, no kidding, dynamite. Yes, some rooms were blasted open, not because they were locked, but because they were slow. And patience wasn't exactly a popular trait in the early days of American exploration. You pass a collapsed wall, originally part of a two-story dwelling that may well have fallen due to careless hands rather than time. Later, preservationists would stabilize it, of course, patch the holes, rebuild where possible, but the scars remain. One particularly infamous group of looters in the 1890s claimed they were saving ancient artifacts by removing them before the elements could. The problem, they didn't catalogue anything. They didn't map locations. They didn't care what the items meant, only what they were worth. And bones. Bones were the hottest commodity of all. You stop at a corner of the canyon once called Mummy House by early visitors. They weren't wrong. Several desiccated remains were found here, perfectly preserved by the dry air and darkness. Instead of reverence, they inspired postcards, literally. Photos of the mummified dead were sold to tourists, often posed upright, smiling or grimacing with stiff dignity under captions like an ancient resident or Mesa Verde grandmother. The people in those images had names, lives, rituals, but in the eyes of Victorian souvenir culture they were curiosities, conversation pieces, that uncomfortable cabinet between your piano and your ethics. Museums around the country, around the world, competed to acquire Mesa Verde artifacts. Pots, baskets, sandals, bones, feathers, tools, jewelry, all uprooted and shipped away. Few collections were documented well, most weren't. And here's a lesser-known truth: the value of a pot to early collectors increased if it was intact. If it wasn't, well, nothing a little glue couldn't fix. Archaeological context was shattered in more ways than one. You pause in front of a painted jar, now resting in its original alcove, carefully restored by modern conservators. Its beautiful black-on-white geometric patterns curling around its belly like vines. There's a fine crack along one side. You wonder, was it broken in ancient times or while being packed in a crate headed for Chicago? One particularly quirky anecdote from the era: a man named Judge Jesse Nussbaum, an early archaeologist and photographer, once shipped entire walls of cliff dwellings to Washington, D.C. for study. They were reassembled like puzzles in the Smithsonian, then mostly forgotten in basements for decades. You try not to judge him. It was a different time. But still an entire wall. Some scholars did better. The early 20th century saw the rise of more careful professional approaches. Experts like Alfred Kiva and Emil Haury began emphasizing the importance of stratigraphy documentation and, shockingly, not destroying what you were studying. The field matured, but the damage had already been done. Thousands of objects removed, countless clues lost, and the people whose descendants still live today rarely consulted, rarely acknowledged. It took nearly a century for repatriation efforts to begin in earnest. Today, laws like NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, ensure that human remains and sacred items must be returned to affiliated tribes. It's a start. But there's still a long road ahead. You sit on a stone where an archaeologist once knelt, brush in hand. The view is still the same. Canyons yawning into distance, the wind steady and dry, the dwellings whispering. But now you know what was taken, and what can never be replaced. You close your eyes and hear a voice, faint but firm. Not a ghost, just memory, asking not to be owned, only to be honored. The path under your feet has changed again, not worn dirt or weathered sandstone, but gravel. Carefully placed, neatly edged, made for walking shoes and stroller wheels. A ranger passes you with a practiced smile and a wide-brimmed hat. Ahead, a sign reads, Cliff Palace Ranger, guided tours only. And just like that, the ruins are a museum. You take a breath. It's still sacred here, but different now, curated, framed, slightly laminated. You follow the tour route, imagining the first visitors who came not to dig or document, but simply to see. Victorian ladies in starched blouses fanning themselves wide-eyed. Stiff-jawed men with opera glasses and linen field suits. The early 20th century elite. This wasn't wilderness to them. It was spectacle. In 1906, when Mesa Verde was declared a national park, it became the first site in the United States preserved explicitly for its human-made heritage. Not a geyser, not a redwood, a city, a civilization. It was a major shift in thinking, and it attracted a new kind of guest, the tourist. You walk the same paths they did, though yours are safer now, reinforced with handrails and interpretive signage. You stop in front of a kiva where a ranger is giving a short talk. A child beside you asks if the ancient people had iPhones. The ranger chuckles. They had something better, she says. Each other. You smile. Not bad. The tour continues through the heart of Cliff Palace. The ranger points out architectural features ceremonial chambers, storage rooms. You notice everyone's steps a little lighter when they enter the shadowed areas. It's instinct. The hush creeps in respectful and unsure. But not everyone was so careful in those early years. You pass a series of deep foot grooves worn into the stone. Not ancient wear, but modern. Millions of feet climbing the same narrow paths year after year, compacting sandstone into polished dips. Places where old ladders once rested now bear the permanent marks of sneakers, boots and sandals with socks. Preservationists eventually intervened. Paths were rerouted, access restricted. Rooms once open to the breeze were sealed off with wooden doors and plexiglass. Kivas were reinforced with steel mesh, hidden beneath adobe facades. Necessary? Absolutely. Romantic? Not particularly. But the goal is no longer raw discovery, it's longevity. The early 1900s saw massive efforts to stabilize the cliff dwellings. Bricks were replaced, mortar, repaired collapsed walls, rebuilt stone by stone, and not always correctly. Some reconstructions guessed at original shapes, others simply smoothed things over. As a result, many areas today look less like ruins and more like movie sets. One quirky example: in the 1930s, the Civilian Conservation Corps, part of Roosevelt's New Deal, was assigned to help preserve the park. Young men with little archaeological training but a lot of shovels. Some accounts say they occasionally restored walls with concrete and rebar, which, you'll agree, was not part of the original ancestral Puebloan aesthetic. Still, their work kept the site standing, and standing it remains. You pause at a rest area built in the 1950s, shaded by wood lattice and smelling faintly of sunscreen and trail mix. Families sit nearby flipping through park brochures. Someone asks where the snack bar is. Someone else wonders aloud if the ruins are real. You look back at the cliffs, they're as real as memory. But your experience of them, it's now guided by rails and rules carefully scripted. There's a sign warning against touching the walls, not just to protect the stone, but to prevent oils from your skin from altering the chemical balance of the ancient plaster. And yet, here you are, still able to stand where someone once ground corn for breakfast, still able to descend into a kiva where chants echoed across generations, still able to run your fingers along stones smoothed by hands long gone. The museumification of Mesa Verde has its critics. Some say it fossilizes a living culture, others say it sanitizes a past full of complexity. But even with these limitations, the park preserves something vital. A doorway, not just to the past, but to humility. Because for all the gift shops and ranger lectures and Instagram photos, one truth remains we're walking through. The echoes of a civilization that built, loved, endured, and chose to walk away. That deserves reverence. And maybe the occasional whispered apology for our cargo shorts and disposable coffee cups. As you leave the path, a visitor asks you where to find the perfect view. You point silently toward a shaded alcove where light dances across stone. They won't find it on a sign, but it's there, waiting. You take the longer trail now, the one that curves behind the cliffs and out of sight from the guided tour routes. The gravel gives way to sand, then to bare sandstone streaked with centuries of water stains. Up here, the ruins fade from sight, and what remains is something rawer. A woman crouches beneath a pinon tree, her sun hat askew, brush in hand. She doesn't notice you at first, not because she's being rude, but because her world is focused down to a square meter of dirt and stone. She's a modern archaeologist, and she's not here to unearth treasure. She's here to listen with a pick and a notebook. This is the archaeology of careful hands and patient years, where a single broken bead can take a week to document, and a layer of ash is read like a paragraph. You watch as she measures a faint soil change, jotting notes in a weatherproof journal with practiced shorthand. She glances up and smiles. This wall here, it's older than Cliff Palace, maybe 950 CE, mesa top structure, probably domestic, maybe ceremonial, possibly both. That phrase again. Probably, maybe, possibly, but this is the new rhythm of science, one that trades certainty for nuance, answers for better questions. Early archaeology was all shovels and display cases. This is detective work in slow motion. You kneel beside her, careful not to cast a shadow over the grid of strings that marks the site, like a spider web. She hands you a small flake of stone, shaped, chipped along the edge, sharp enough to slice fruit if you had any. A scraper, she says. Yucca, fibre, deer hide, that kind of thing. It looks like nothing, feels like everything. Here's something most people don't realize. 90% of what archaeologists find isn't intact pottery or jewelry. It's trash. Middens, scraps, bits of broken tools, food remnants, flakes of stone left over from toolmaking. Refuse, yes, but refuse with rhythm. Because every piece tells you something. Here's a hearth with charred corn kernels. Radiocarbon dating suggests someone cooked here around 1120 CE. Here's a potsherd with a geometric pattern that matches styles found 200 miles south. Trade. Here's a human footprint preserved in hardened clay. Heel-deep toes splayed. Someone running, dancing, startled by a snake. Historians still argue whether these moments of preservation are common or rare. Some believe countless traces are waiting just beneath the surface. Others think what we've found is all we'll ever find, that time has already swept the rest away. You walk with the archaeologist to a nearby tool station, shade tarp crates of bagged soil clipboards. She shows you an obsidian blade, razor thin, still sharp. We don't find these often here, she says. The closest source is over 200 miles away. That means someone carried it, traded for it, or stole it. Whatever the story, it moved. Mobility, migration, the undercurrent of everything. One fringe theory suggests some of the ancient roads in this region weren't just for trade or ceremony, but messages, literal landscape language, a path carved into the earth as a form of communication. Not everyone agrees, but you can't help noticing the way the road cuts perfectly straight across miles of difficult terrain, as if pointing to something sacred just over the horizon. You return to the dig site and sit beside the edge of a partially exposed wall. You can see each stone placed with care, aligned not just horizontally but with subtle tilt, probably to channel water or brace against shifting weight. You think of all the scientific tools that early explorers didn't use, the context they bulldozed in their rush for trophies. Here, context is everything. You don't just find a bone, you ask where it was, how it was lying, what was nearby, how deep it was, what layer it was in, whether there were burn marks, whether it was pigmented, whether it was broken by use or by time. And sometimes, after weeks of work, the answer is, we're not sure. But that's okay, because the new archaeology isn't about proving a theory, it's about hearing the site, letting it speak. Even if it speaks slowly, even if it never quite finishes the sentence, you help carry a bucket of sifted dirt over to a sorting tarp. It's warm in your hands, earth the color of cinnamon and memory, the kind that once held homes and now holds questions. As you walk back to the cliff trail, the woman calls after you. "Remember," she says, brushing her hands off on her jeans, "we're not digging up the past. We're borrowing the present." You nod, because that feels right. The cliffs are still speaking. We just had to stop shouting long enough to hear them. You walk back to the edge, not of the canyon, but of time. Below, the cliff dwellings huddle in the shadows, warm sandstone glowing gold under the late afternoon sun. Above, the sky yawns open, vast blue, unconcerned. You sit at a quiet overlook where no tourists murmur, no rangers narrate, no signs remind you to recycle. Just you, the wind, and the long, low breath of history. You let it out. It's a lot to hold, because once you've traced the path from those first woven sandals to the mesh-reinforced kivas from sacred footprints, to guided tours from ancestral ritual to archaeological protocol, there's something oddly dizzying about it all. Mesa Verde is not just a place, it's a palimpsest, a layered memory that keeps being written over but never erased. You close your eyes and listen, not to sound but to sensation, the hum of heat rising from stone, the scrape of wind along the cliff wall, the faint drum of your own heart aligning with rhythms much older than yours. Somewhere nearby, a raven calls, not once, not twice, 3 times. You smile, a joke, maybe, or a warning. The old stories say the raven is a messenger, or a trickster, or both. Either way, it seems appropriate. You start down a side trail not marked on the brochure. It's narrow, dusty, barely a whisper between junipers, but it leads somewhere, a place not featured in most postcards, an unexcavated alcove dwelling. Small, weathered, half sunken into the rock, but unmistakably lived in once. There are no plaques, no ropes, no polished interpretive signs, just shadows, stone, and stillness. You duck inside. It smells faintly of ash and earth. The walls curve in close like a held breath. You sit on a flat rock that might once have been a sleeping bench or a shelf or just a stone. And there, scratched into the back wall, almost invisible in the low light, you see it, a spiral, faint, worn, but there, the same spiral you saw in the mural. The same spiral described by that Hopi elder. The same spiral etched into pots and painted on hides and traced in sand. It means journey. It means return. It means time folding in on itself like a sleeping child. Historians still debate whether such spirals are symbols of migration, spiritual passage, or even celestial alignments. Some say they mark solstice shadows. Others claim they map water sources. Others insist they represent the movement of clans through the cycles of the world. Maybe they're all right, maybe none of them are. You trace the spiral with your finger not touching, just following the air above it, slowly, gently, reverently, and you wonder how many generations have done this, how many feet have walked this path, how many hands pressed against this stone, how many stories whispered into this silence. This dwelling wasn't meant for you, and yet it welcomes you, not with comfort, with clarity, that these people weren't primitive, weren't lost, weren't ghosts. They were planners, astronomers, engineers, artists, diplomats, farmers. They built communities that lasted centuries, and when the time came, they left, not in flames but in grace. You step back out into the light, blinking, and something shifts. You realize Mesa Verde doesn't just teach history, it teaches scale, your life, your noise, your rush, your screens and deadlines and pinging phones. They're real, yes, but they're small and temporary. And when you place them beside 700 years of human endurance of stone placed on stone hand pressed to wall, they shrink, not in worth, but in weight. You walk slowly back toward the main trail, noticing how the shadows have lengthened. The wind is cooler now. A golden hush has settled over the cliffs as if even time is wrapping itself in a blanket. You pass a final dwelling partly hidden behind a curtain of stone. Just one room, but in its doorway, perfectly framed by the fading light, is a single stone, smooth, round, balanced. You have no idea what it once meant, but it feels intentional. And that maybe is the lesson of Mesa Verde. That meaning doesn't always come in loud shapes. That power doesn't need to roar. That sometimes a civilization's greatest strength is knowing when to build and when to move on. The moon is rising. Silver light washes over the canyon, casting long shadows that slip between the cliff dwellings like quiet ghosts on tiptoe. You stand alone now, no more tourists, no more tour guides, no more archaeologists sorting tiny flakes by flashlight. Just you, the night, and the lingering breath of a people who once lived where now only echoes reside. You're not afraid. The silence here doesn't sting. It soothes. Still, it's easy to let your imagination wander. You picture the ancestral Puebloans gathered in the central plaza, a nighttime ceremony in full swing, drums low and steady bodies, swaying firelight flickering against the painted stone. Corn pollen offerings rising on the wind, a whispered chant following a moon shadow up the cliff. Gone, no, just elsewhere. Tonight you feel them more than ever, because there's something about moonlight that remembers. It doesn't burn like the sun, it reveals gently. As if the past isn't a ruin but a memory you haven't visited in a while. You step into a kiva, one of the few still accessible after dark thanks to preservation work and possibly a little ranger leniency. It smells of dust and faint resin. The roof beams stretch above you like ribs. You imagine the chamber, once full of life rituals, storytelling, planning for crops, naming newborns, grieving the departed. Some believe kivas were more than meeting places, they were symbolic wombs of the earth's spiritual chambers of emergence. A place where the people came not just to gather but to realign, to remember where they came from. You lower yourself slowly onto the bench that runs along the interior. It's rough beneath you, worn smooth by time. You place your hands on the wall, just for a moment, just enough to feel the coolness of stone, the patience of it. There's no chanting now, no voices, but there's presence. You close your eyes. A soft breeze stirs the air through the sipapu, the small hole in the center of the kiva floor, said to represent the portal through which the ancestors first emerged into this world. Your breath matches it, slow and steady. And you begin to understand this isn't a place of endings, it's a place of thresholds, of passing from one world into another, sometimes literally, sometimes spiritually. The people of Mesa Verde lived between layers, between earth and sky, between day and night, between practical and sacred. And their silence. It's not a void. It's an offering. You rise and step outside. The moon has climbed higher now, bathing everything in a pale glow. The cliff face gleams like polished bone. You walk the ledge path slowly, carefully aware that every footstep follows thousands of others, even if you can't see them. You stop near a small dwelling tucked away in the shadows, a single room half collapsed. But in the wall, a niche still holds something small. You lean in, a finger-width piece of charcoal left there, dropped there burnt into place you'll never know. And maybe you're not supposed to, because not everything is meant to be solved. Some things are meant to remain as a challenge, as a presence, as a whisper between generations. The wind sighs through the canyon, and you feel it again. This place doesn't need your voice. It needs your listening. Modern scholarship continues to debate why the cliff dwellings were left behind. Was it climate? Was it conflict? Were the social structures stretched too thin? Was it a sacred migration? Was it all of these woven into something larger than explanation? Historians still argue whether the final departure was gradual or sudden, unified or scattered, peaceful or fraught. Dendrochronology points to a 23-year drought beginning around 1276, but oral histories tell of spirit-led journeys of people following the sun, of knowing when a place has given all it can. You stare down at the Sipapu again, a portal from below, a beginning, or an invitation to return. You step away, back into the open night where constellations glitter like petroglyphs scrawled across the heavens. The same stars the cliff dwellers watched, the same ones you see now, the same ones the children of their descendants will still trace long after we are gone. You walk the path back up toward the mesa rim. It's late now, most would be asleep. But the cliffs do not sleep. They remember. They hold, they wait, and as you pass the final turn before leaving the view of Cliff Palace, you stop one last time and bow your head, not in mourning, not in farewell, but in quiet thanks for the silence, for the spirals, for the stories we will never fully know. And that's okay. Some echoes are meant to linger. Dawn again. A pale thread of light pulls itself across the rim of the world. The sky is still lavender and unsure, and you stand wrapped in your jacket, watching the cliffs slowly return to color. They've always been here, waiting in the dark, like old friends, just quiet enough to let you forget, just bright enough to remind you. Mesa Verde, the green table. Though these days it's more brown and dusty than lush, the name still fits in spirit, a place elevated, set apart, offered like a table between the heavens and the dry, cracked plains. You sip from your canteen and stretch. Your body feels different now, not from hiking, but from holding something weighty. Something old, not sadness exactly, not awe either. It's perspective. You begin your slow walk down from the lookout one last time. Not toward the ruins, but toward something newer, the visitor center. Now, before you recoil, let's admit something. It's not all bad. Sometimes the best way to protect sacred space is by carefully funneling human curiosity into labeled glass cases and printed pamphlets. The building is sleek, sustainable, full of wood and stone and low voices. There's a model of the cliff dwellings at 120 scale, a timeline wrapping around the walls, interactive screens blinking politely with curated facts. You wander in with soft steps. Here, an exhibit on pottery. There, a display on farming tools. In the corner, fragments of sandals worn through at the heel. There's something surprisingly moving about seeing them not as relics but as someone's Tuesday footwear. You can almost hear the sigh of the person who wore them, muttering about rocks stuck between their toes. A small group gathers near a touchscreen map. A child presses the play audio button, and a narrator's voice spills into the space. The people of Mesa Verde were master builders, astronomers and agriculturalists. You step away, drawn instead to a quieter section, a room set aside for descendant voices. Here the walls are painted in rich earth tones, and quotes from Pueblo elders curl across them like songs caught in wind. Not scientific findings, not excavation notes, just truths held and handed down. Our ancestors built these places not to last forever, but to teach forever. We did not disappear. We moved with the breath of the earth. Every step away from the cliffs is a step toward remembering who we are. You read each slowly. Let the words settle like dust on your shoulders.
And you begin to understand something deeper. The descendants aren't just the keepers of this legacy. They are the legacy. Breathing it, cooking it, praying it, laughing it into another century. You move to a circular bench in the center of the room, above which hangs a large stylized spiral made from wood and riverstone. It spins slowly in the air-conditioned draft, catching light on its edges. A modern echo of an ancient truth. The spiral again. Always the spiral. You smile. It's been with you the whole journey, scratched into stone, painted on pottery, spoken in stories, and now suspended in mid-air above a museum bench. You sit. Around you, visitors move quietly. Some linger, some rush through, some take selfies. But for a moment, you simply sit. You close your eyes. The spiral spins above you, and in your mind it's no longer just a shape. It's a motion. Mesa Verde wasn't built to be a monument. It was built to be a moment, one part of a greater rhythm. A pulse.
A breath, the ancestral. Puebloans came here, lived here, loved here, learned here. And then with grace they moved on. Not vanishing, not crumbling, changing. You stand and walk back outside. The light has sharpened. The mesa glows golden now. You hear birds calling from the piñons. Someone's boot crunches behind you on gravel. Life goes on. And Mesa Verde, it doesn't hold you. It reminds you that there are cycles older than time and stories that never need to end because they keep beginning. You drive now, slowly winding down the narrow roads that curve along the mesa's back. The cliffs recede in your mirror, but they don't leave your chest. They sit there low and warm like the afterglow of a dream you're not quite ready to wake from. The road is quiet. No cell signal. Just the steady hum of tires on asphalt and the occasional jolt when you hit a patch of pothole disguised as shadow. To your left, the land rolls wide, pale grasses, dark junipers, and that endless blue dome above it all. To your right, somewhere just out of view, are the cliff dwellings. Still, watching, you round a bend and spot something out of place. A cluster of roadside crosses, half-faded plastic flowers and a metal bench. A pull-off. You stop. Stepping out into the highland air, you walk slowly toward the little shrine. It's not ancient, not visibly. No stone carvings, no ceremonial altars. Just the kind of place someone created because memory needs anchors. You sit on the bench. Someone has scratched a message into the metal armrest. They never left. We just stopped seeing them. You don't know who they were to the person who wrote that. Maybe ancestors, maybe spirits, maybe just people. But the truth of it is unmistakable because as you sit there, staring into the folded land, your mind pulls up the tapestry again. The one you've been weaving since this journey began. Corn grinding in shadowed rooms, sunlight slicing through narrow doorways, stone steps worn by centuries of sandaled feet, painted spirals, burnt offerings, silent migrations, all of it. You think back to something small, maybe even forgettable, the single corn kernel fossilized into a floor crack in a storage room. You can still see it, that one seed left behind now immortal in clay. You chuckle softly. It's always the smallest things that linger, isn't it? Historians still debate whether the abandonment of the cliffs was part of a planned movement or a slow unraveling. Climate shifts, water scarcity, shifting alliances, but rarely do they consider the possibility that it was emotional. What if it wasn't just about survival? What if it was about spiritual timing? The ancestral Puebloans may have read the land in ways we no longer can. Maybe they felt something shift, not catastrophically, but cosmically. Maybe their relationship with the Mesa reached its natural conclusion, not a failure, a farewell. One fringe theory posits that ancient communities worked on a principle of completion migration, moving on after achieving the purpose of a place. Build, flourish, learn, leave. It's poetic and uncomfortable because we moderns like permanence. We like foundations and locks and maps that say mine. The idea of building something magnificent only to walk away from it feels alien. But here it makes sense. The cliffs didn't beg for forever. They offered sanctuary, and sanctuary once accepted eventually releases you. You rise from the bench and walk toward the edge of the pull-off. The canyon opens below, wide and wild. You can't see the ruins from here, but you feel them, still tucked into their stone cradles, still holding stories you'll never quite reach. A breeze rises, it's dry and sweet pinon sage, maybe a hint of ash. You inhale deeply and close your eyes. In your mind, you see them again. Families walking single file along narrow trails, bundles on backs, children clinging to skirts, elders murmuring to the wind, not broken, not exiled, departing, not because they had to, because they were ready. You open your eyes. A hawk wheels overhead, circling once before slipping out of sight. You take that as a cue. Back in your car, you drive again, slowly, reverently down the last stretch of Mesa Road. You pass the park entrance sign and glance in the mirror one last time. No fanfare, no farewell, just cliffs and clouds, and a quiet that speaks louder than any monument. Mesa Verde will still be there, not waiting, just being. And now so will you. You're on the open road now. The mesa has faded behind the horizon, replaced by long stretches of desert highway, soft ochre earth on either side, prickly scrubland, scattered like punctuation across a vast wind-written page. There's music on the radio maybe, but it feels intrusive. You turn it off. The silence is fuller somehow, and inside that silence reflection. Mesa Verde was never just about the stone, it was about the people seen and unseen. And now your thoughts stretch further than the canyon's edge, reaching out toward where those people may have gone. Because the story doesn't end at the cliff's lip. It continues southward, to Chaco Canyon, to the Rio Grande Pueblos, to Hopi Mesas, to the dust-chalked villages perched above dry washes where the sun still rises over cornfields planted by hand, and the ancestors are never far from the breakfast table. You imagine their journey not a hurried escape, but a measured migration, step by step, guided by stars, stories, intuition. They didn't just walk away from the cliffs, they walked toward a future, and that future still exists. You pull into a small pueblo, not one marked boldly on tourist maps, just a modest cluster of adobe homes, window frames painted turquoise, and smoke rising lazily from a chimney. It smells of pinon wood and tortillas. A woman sits out front weaving. Her hands move quickly, automatically, with a rhythm you recognize now, not from watching it before, but from feeling it in those cliff walls. She glances up and offers a smile that is neither welcoming nor dismissive. Just present. You nod. The cultural continuity is humbling. These are not reenactors, not relics, not some echo of a vanished people. They are the same people. You speak softly with an elder seated beneath a shaded arbor. His face is lined not with years, but with stories. When you mention Mesa Verde, he nods slowly and says, "Our footsteps are still there, just covered in wind." He tells you about clans that remember the cliffs, about songs passed down that mention high ladders and stone kivas, about a migration not of defeat, but of rightness. "We didn't fall," he says. "We moved." His words are so steady, so matter-of-fact that you find yourself smiling. And again that spiral unfurls in your mind, always returning, always moving. You ask if he's been back to the ruins. He shakes his head. "Why I carry them here," he says, tapping his chest. And suddenly you understand the goal was never to preserve the place. It was to carry the practice, the wisdom, the seed of culture that can grow in new soil, the lesson of building, living, listening, and knowing when to let go. Western history loves its ruins, tumbled columns, sunken temples, broken amphitheaters. But here the true marvel isn't what crumbled, it's what kept walking. You spend time in the Pueblo, watch a child help grind corn with her grandmother. Hear laughter rise from an open window as dinner simmers. See patterns painted on pottery that echo those you saw inside a cliff dwelling centuries old. One pot in particular catches your eye, white slip, black lines, a spiral at the base. You ask where the design comes from. The woman painting it shrugs gently. "It's always been," she says. "It's how the world moves." You stay until the light softens again, then leave quietly without goodbye. You've learned by now some things are not concluded. They are simply respected and left in peace. As the road stretches before you once more, you glance in the rearview mirror, not to cling to what's behind, but to remember the shape of it. Mesa Verde may have fallen silent once, but the people did not. They just changed where their songs rose. Now they rise with cooking smoke, with children's footsteps, with the hush before a drum beat in a feast day dance. And in your chest, too, a new rhythm has begun, a remembering. The highway grows long and quiet again. The desert rolls out like a parchment scroll, all sun and wind and shimmering mirages. You pass no billboards, no gas stations with souvenir moccasins, just time stretched and slow, unfolding like the ridges in a canyon wall. And somewhere between miles, something settles inside you. Not an answer, not quite, but a knowing. You've been walking alongside a story that's bigger than explanation, bigger than bones or baskets or timelines. And in its shape, winding, weathered, unfinished, you've started to recognize something. The spiral isn't just the past, it's a pattern in you. You pull over, near an overlook, no sign, no landmark, just a high place where the world opens its chest and shows you everything it's carried. You step out, stretch your legs, and feel the wind tug gently at your clothes. Far off in the distance, too far to see, but close enough to imagine, lies a place where cliff walls still cradle empty rooms. But you don't need to see them anymore.
They're already inside you now. You sit on a rock, let your breath slow, and you start thinking about legacy. Not the bronze statue kind, not the named after you kind, but the quiet kind. The kind you leave behind when you build with care, live with reverence, and walk away without needing to be remembered. That's what Mesa Verde teaches, isn't it? Not how to dominate the earth, but how to belong to it for a while. how to listen for when a place has taught you all it can, how to know when it's time to move forward, not because you've failed, but because you've grown. It's hard to let go, especially when what you've built is beautiful. Cliff Palace is a marvel, but it was never meant to last forever. It was meant to serve to shelter, to hold a chapter in the long, long story of a people who never stopped walking. Historians still argue whether this kind of movement is wisdom or necessity.
Was Mesa Verde a grand success or a bittersweet goodbye? Was it a masterpiece or a memory, you think? Maybe both? And maybe that's the point, because permanence is a comfort we chase. But adaptability is the wisdom that lasts. You look out across the desert trying to imagine how those final days felt. The last fires smouldering, the final pot buried beneath the floor, the children wide-eyed, the elders silent, not afraid, just ready. They probably didn't call it abandonment. They called it life, movement, purpose unfolding. You run a hand along the rock beneath you. It's warm from the sun, pitted with time. Somewhere in its silence you feel companionship, like it's been watching for longer than you've been breathing. You smile. One of the more curious fringe ideas you encountered was the theory that Mesa Verde was part of a sacred geometric network, nodes of power and prayer strung across the southwest like a spider's web. You don't know if that's true, but you do know that something sacred lives in those cliffs still, not because of ghosts or secrets or mystical forces, but because the people who built it did so with presence, and presence lingers. You stand again, brushing dust from your palms. A car passes in the distance, its engine a whisper. A raven flies overhead, circles once, then disappears behind a bluff. You whisper something, not a prayer, not a farewell, just a thank you to the mesa, to the silence, to the spiral. You're on foot again, not because your car broke down or your GPS lost its signal, though both would feel perfectly fitting out here, but because it just felt right. A narrow dirt trail winds away from the road, leading toward a formation that doesn't have a name on the map, but pulls at you all the same. Something in the tilt of the stone, the hush of the junipers, a feeling that the story isn't quite done with you yet. So you walk, boots pressing into powdery red earth, wind combing through your hair, that familiar crunch of gravel that sounds a little like thought. This isn't Mesa Verde, but it echoes it. Low sandstone ridges rise around you, carved by centuries of wind and rain. Lichen blooms in shades of copper and moss. Every step feels like turning a page in a book written in texture instead of words. And then, almost imperceptibly, you arrive. A shallow overhang in the cliff face, half hidden by sagebrush. No ruins, no pottery shards. Just a blackened patch on the stone where countless fires once burned. The soot is so deep it almost shimmers. You kneel. Someone cooked here, laughed here, sat here exactly as you are watching the sun slide across the sky and wondering when the first stars would appear. You don't need artifacts to know that. The ground remembers. Farther in, you spot a faint petroglyph, just a line then another, crossed, then a third curling around them like a spiral's whisper. The spiral again. You can't escape it, can you? And maybe that's the point. Because it's not a loop, not a trap, it's a path, a rhythm, a way of walking that doesn't demand a destination, just attention. You rest your palm against the wall, cool, solid, waiting, no noise, no revelation, just presence. You sit for a long time, let the questions arise and dissolve like dust in sunlight. You think of the archaeologists with their notebooks, the park rangers with their stories, the Pueblo elders with their truths, passed down in rhythm and breath, not citation and slideshows. One of them said the land doesn't forget you if you walk it with care. You understand that now. Maybe that's what the people of Mesa Verde understood too, that building isn't always the answer, that sometimes the greatest wisdom is knowing when to live lightly, to learn deeply, to leave gently, not because you're giving up, but because the song has changed and you're listening for the next verse. You rise again. The trail is still there, though fainter now, as if testing whether you truly want to follow it. You do. With each step, the cliff behind you grows smaller, but not dimmer. You feel it tucked in the folds of your memory now, like a kiva flame never fully extinguished. You think back to that Hopi elder, the one who said, when we left, we carried the light with us, and when we arrived, we lit it again. Mesa Verde didn't fall silent. It changed keys, shifted tone, and the melody still plays, soft, persistent winding through generations like a flute in dusk. You keep walking unsure where the trail leads, but that's all right. The spiral isn't about destination, it's about returning not to the same place, but to the same truth. And you're finally starting to hear it. You make camp under a sky too wide to measure. The stars arrive slowly, one shy glimmer at a time, until the heavens fill with them, dusty trails, sharp points, constellations, ancient enough to have once guided migrations and harvests and prayers alike. You lie on your back, wrapped in a blanket, with your head resting on your pack, and let the night settle around you. No tents, no fire, just silence and starlight. You think of the people who lived under this same sky, not centuries ago, but last week, last generation this morning. People whose songs still ripple through ceremonies, people whose children still laugh in adobe courtyards, people whose ancestors carved spirals into stone so we wouldn't forget how to listen. You close your eyes, breathe in dust and sage and the faraway rhythm of something older than time, and you remember. Mesa Verde wasn't just the end of something, it was a turning point, a bend in the road, a moment when the spiral curved and the people followed. They left the cliffs not in collapse but in ceremony, not in silence but in song. They didn't just vanish, they became river dwellers, mesa climbers, Hopi farmers, and Zuni potters and Tewa singers and Keres storytellers. They scattered like pollen, not to disappear, but to plant new roots in places they knew were waiting. And now those roots hold. You think of that pot you saw earlier, painted with the same design, found on a 700-year-old shard, not a replica, a continuation, a breath, stretched long and unbroken. Historians still debate the mechanics of migration, how many left where they went, what they carried, but they often miss the feeling of it, the heartbeat, the purpose, the wisdom of walking away with your dignity and your direction intact. You open your eyes again. The Milky Way stretches overhead like a path in the sky. You trace its arc with your finger, remembering how many pueblos align their windows to stars, how kivas open toward the constellations, how ceremony follows the rhythm of the heavens. Mesa Verde wasn't just built below the stars, it was built with them. You sit up, legs crossed, spine straight, like you're in your own kiva now, only instead of stone walls you have sagebrush and sky. You say nothing, because the story is still being told. Every pot fired, every song sung, every spiral etched. They're all verses in the same long chant, and you're part of it now, not by blood, but by listening, not by claim, but by care. You pack your things slowly, fold the blanket, strap on the pack. The road waits not with urgency, but with patience. Like the spiral, it curves back on itself, not to return to the past, but to carry it forward. Morning again. You walk now, not toward anything, not away from anything, just walking. The world is soft in that golden hour hush, where shadows stretch long and everything seems to breathe just a little slower. Your boots press into the earth with a gentle rhythm. You know this sound now, the sound of movement with purpose but without urgency, the ancient migration cadence. You follow it, down a ridge, along a dry wash, past cottonwoods just beginning to leaf out, and somewhere in that ordinary stretch of land you feel the spiral close. Not end, just circle back to where you began, only now you're different, wiser, softer, quieter. You pass a rock with a spiral carved into it, weathered, almost erased. You trace it with your gaze, not your fingers, and nod. It doesn't need your touch, just your witness. And with that, you know Mesa Verde didn't vanish. It shifted from stone to story, from cliff to step, from dwelling to dance. The people didn't disappear, they dispersed. And their silence, it wasn't absence, it was continuance. In another form, another place, another song. You arrive at a small hill and sit beneath a juniper tree, its bark peeling in long curled ribbons, its scent sharp and grounding. From here, you can see the vast southwest stretch toward the horizon, one mesa after another, a quilt of memory and stone. You close your eyes and for a moment you imagine it all alive again, the hearth fires, the laughter, the corn pollen offerings, the low hum of drum and chant in the kiva's belly. It's not gone, it's still here, in the land, in the people, in you, because you've carried the spiral all this way. And now you set it down, not to abandon it, but to let it root. Somewhere a raven calls again, just once this time, as if to say you've heard the story. You nod. And in that nod is the promise to carry it carefully forward, not as trivia, not as myth, but as something sacred and unfolding, like a breath, like a spiral, like a place that once fell silent, so we could finally learn how to listen. And now, dear traveler, it's time to rest. Let the wind fade from your thoughts. Let the spiral soften in your memory its final turn, unwinding into stillness. The stone walls have told their story. The stars have sung you gently across centuries. And the cliff dwellings now nestle back into their quiet cradles of shadow, content to dream again. Breathe deep. The mesa is far behind, yet still beside you. Its silence a gentle hand at your shoulder. Its wisdom folded like a blanket around your mind. No need to remember every detail, just the rhythm. The pulse of steps along canyon paths, the hush of moonlight on ancient plaster, the whisper of corn stalks swaying in wind that never forgets your name. Drift now, let your breath slow. Let your thoughts grow soft and round and light, like clouds settling behind distant peaks. You are safe. You are carried. You are part of the spiral. And sleep at last is the next step forward. End of script. Sweet dreams.